What do you have in your glass in front of you? And what kind of flavours can you pick from that? But more than anything, can you tell perhaps where those flavours might have come from? That's what we're going to spend a bit of time looking at tonight. I'll see you in a wee minute. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to another Thursday night. Welcome to the vPub. I hope you're all doing very well. I hope you're comfortable and settled and sane, despite the nonsense that we still seem to be living through. Lots and lots of us still very much on lockdown, but we don't talk about any of that. This is a distraction tonight. A little bit of time, just whiskey time, a little bit of community time. Tonight we're going to be talking about flavour and whiskey again. Now, I spoke about flavours and whiskey last year for a few vPubs, touching on different aspects of flavour and tasting notes and terroir and all of these wonderful things. But tonight it's more about what affects certain elements of the whiskey making process has on flavour, and see if we can have a discussion about that and pull in some expert assistance to try and match that up. So later on in the stream tonight, I've got Alex Bruce from Adelphi and Ardnamurchan Distillery joining me, and I'm very much looking forward to welcoming in Alex. If you are picking this up on the replay, I'm very, very grateful. Thank you so much for doing that. You'll notice that there are timestamps in the description box below. It might take me a little time to get there because the video has to render afterwards and things, but I've been doing that recently on recent vPubs. So if you want to skip ahead to the bits that interest you, you can do that. And for the people that are here live, welcome everybody. It's wonderful for so many of you to be hanging out with me live on a Thursday night, and I really do appreciate the support. Let's jump in quickly and do the most important thing and welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Who do we have in this evening? We have Gal Sean. Gal, good to see you. He's saying, superb topic, sipping a 12-year-old Lochendal. Fantastic, Gal. Nice to have you in. Menno, that's multi-mission. He said, evening, Roy. And Pierre Croft. Pierre, I think that might be a new name. If that's a new name, you're very welcome here, my friend. Nice to see you. Whiskey Throttle. Daniel out in Canada. Hey, Roy, watch for the wooden horse poop. I've got some of that to share a wee bit later on. Some things are harder to get hold of than others, Daniel. Wonderful to have you. Callum Muir is here saying, oh dear, I hope your evening improves. Oh, he's chatting to Frank. My evening is doing very well, Callum, and it's nice to welcome you in as well. Jimmy Jazz over in the States. Good evening, Aqvavitae. Some Royal Brackla in the glass. Roddy would approve. Good to have you, Jimmy. Dram Mondays is here. Gary Cobb is here. Whiskey Bowman Chris is here. The Whiskey Dram. Good to see you, Daniel. Good to see you, my friend. Mark Slinger is here. Graham Mackay, Blair Stevenson, Che Francis. Che is saying, Aaron Quartercast tonight. Loving the spice on it. Fantastic. Good to see you, everyone. Gino is in. Gino from Canada. Hello, Roy. Always nice to see. Always nice to see you as well, Gino. Thank you. Bruno Martins from Portugal. Scott Mills is in. Gerben Blocker. Gerben, I've seen your name before, but I don't know if I've welcomed you. So I'm welcoming you tonight, my friend. I hope you're doing very well. Vicky Thompson is in, saying evening, Aqvavitae and Barflies. Good to have you in, Vicky. Is Grant next to you tonight? I hope he's doing well. Zeliner is here. Andy C over in East Kilbride. Good to have you, Andy. I hope you're doing well. Hans Waldman, it's Alexander. Good to have you, Alexander. Pete Head is here. Frank, always brilliant to see you in. Lee J. Brown, my friend from down south. Carlo Mack, Billy Saunders. Whiskey Weekend Dram, that's Harrow. Connoisseur. Polish guy living in Aberdeen, Knur. Fantastic content you're putting out there as well. Shame I can't understand any of it because it's all in Polish, but you're doing very well on your channel, Knur Connoisseur. If you speak Polish, pick up some of Knur's content over on YouTube. Marcus Crichton and Max, so good to see you, my friend. Hellswood is in, always good to see you, Helen. Dave Cummins is here. Dave, you and I need to connect. I've got an outstanding email for you. I was just working out how to respond, coming up with an idea to replace the original project that we had in mind, Dave. It's good to see you. And Evening Roy saying, glad to be joining, just smoking a cigar and loving the topic. And Dave Cummins, we have a guy that's part of our community. He's a 50-year-old man, the same age as me, and he's yet to have a sip of alcohol in his life. His dream was to have a sip of single malt whiskey in Scotland for his first ever sip of alcohol as a treat to himself. And that was supposed to happen last year before everything was upended. So Dave and I are maybe going to get our heads together and work out if we can come up with some kind of alternative. Where there's a will, there's a way. We're only limited by imagination, Dave. Let's see what we can do. Callum Muir is saying, congratulations on the 300, Roy. I've got a 12-year-old Kalila from Adelphi in my glass tonight, and it's stunning. Slantia. Thank you very much, Callum. Thank you for your virtual drama friend, and for the congratulations. Cheers, Callum. Thanks to you for being a part of it. Cheers. Whiskey Hog, that looks like a new name. Welcome here. Very nice to have you in. Saying evening, Roy. And Richard Hall is saying evening, Roy, as well. Peter Eichen is here. Peter, it must be very, very early in the morning for you down in Australia, but it's wonderful to welcome you in, my friend. Maybe it's some hot coffee you've got in the cup today. Whiskey Games, Matt Bishop is here. Stewie Baby. Robert Fredrickson. So many of you in. Wonderful to have you. So let's, before we get into the main topic tonight, there's something happening tomorrow, and I reached out in order to bring it to your attention. I am sure that you know that tomorrow the Water of Life film goes live. Now, everything, the arrangements were all upended, like everything else. There's a virtual dram come in from Jerry Miller saying, "You're 50, Roy. Oh, to be so young." I am 50. Sometimes I'm surprised as well, Jerry, honestly, the way I feel. But cheers, my friend. Thank you very much for the virtual dram. Cheers. At every moment, you're the oldest you've ever been and as young as you're ever going to be, right, Jerry? But yes, everything was upended about the arrangements for this film. So they had to come up with a different way of handling it and a different way of sharing the movie with everyone. When I looked into it a bit more, and when I heard the director on the Scotch Test Dummies live stream a week or so ago, I was struck because I realised that it was a passion project. It was something that he had created himself. And then I went and I did some research, and I worked out when the dates are and things like that and what's involved, how we can get involved with it. I reached out to Greg. I said, "You want to come on for 5 minutes onto the vPub and tell everybody about your project?" And he's been kind enough to give us some of his time. So that's what I'm going to do first. Gerben Blocker has bought me a dram to say thank you for the Glen Turret. It is amazing. I'm very glad that you're connecting with that. I hope that's the new Glen Turret 12 that you're talking about. It's a wonderfully traditional contemporary dram. Would that be a good way to describe it? I'm very glad that you're enjoying it. And thank you very much for your drama, friend. Cheers, Gerben. Of course, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing your name properly. So let's reach out to the director of the Water of Life movie, Greg Swartz, and welcome him behind the bar at the vPub. Greg, so nice to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's nice to welcome you behind the bar. I have to say, though, can I just say a big thanks to you first before I apologise? The big thanks is that you have scheduled this movie perfectly within 2 vPubs. It starts, the 6 sessions goes live tomorrow night and Friday night, and the final session is on Wednesday next week, just before the next week's vPub goes out. It's very considerate of you, Greg, so thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's by design.
Yes. And also I need to apologise. When I first heard about the Water Life movie, I didn't really connect with it. I should have spent a wee bit more time connecting with it to work out that it was actually, this isn't a partnership or a paid production or a sponsorship, or this is your passion project. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not just me. There's a big team of us, but yes, it began with me, and we're not affiliated with any distillery or any group. It's all produced.
So I worked out as well. I did a wee search on you as well, and you're a Hollywood director. I found one of your movies recently, Harvest Moon.
Another Harvest Moon, yeah.
Yeah, with Ernest Borgnine, who was one of my favourite actors as a kid. But I don't want to digress. So what would make a Hollywood director or a movie director step into the Scotch whisky landscape and want to make a movie about Scotch whisky? How did that come about, Greg?
Well, I was an exchange student in Glasgow when I was in college, and so I've always had a soft spot for Scotland in general, and developed at quite a young age an interest in whiskey. But it was only a few years ago that my wife had never been to Scotland, so we, for our 10th anniversary, went, and it was during that trip that the idea started kind of taking root when we did the Speyside Whiskey Walk. It was during that walk that I started having this kind of, my brain was percolating about, I wanted to tell a story, not about, I didn't want to do a travelogue, because there's been loads of whiskey films that are travelogues, and they're very good. And there's been how-tos, and they're very good. But I wanted to do something that was more about craft focused and about the people and hands-on whiskey making. And it's funny, you said that earlier. You said about the, you were talking about the Glen Turret a minute ago. And you said something that I say all the time about whiskeys that really intrigue me, which are whiskeys that are both very contemporary and very traditional. And I love that tension between the two. And I think it's the most interesting place to be.
That's right. You feel sometimes when you have a wee sip, you feel like it's been tasting like that forever, honestly. And that's what that Glen Turret 12 did for me last week. I evangelized that a lot last week. So before we kind of go on to, because I want to invite you to tell us how we can engage with it, how it's structured, what we can expect. But with your permission, I'll go ahead and I'll share a fabulous trailer just to show everybody, all the barflies and all the whiskey folk, exactly what this movie is about, if that's okay.
Sure, I'd love it.
Have a wee look at this, everyone. Fascinating.
My mum used to say, "Did you go to school today?" I say, "Yep." She said, "Come here." And she smelled it. I know, you've been in that damn distillery again. Bed, no dinner.
Ancient, natural, old, pure.
The blood of one small nation, absolutely. In the mid-1970s, Scotch whisky ceased to be fashionable when it became Dad's drink.
There was just a massive bust.
I've never once met anyone who goes, and there's no emotion behind it. If you do that, God, go and drink vodka.
Even though I'm a scientist, it's actually much, much more of an art.
Looking at Bruichladdich, I said someday I would love to make whiskey at that distillery.
The place was falling apart. There was a sign. It sort of encompasses the whole whiskey industry at the time. Exclamation. And I can remember thinking, I've got to do something about it.
I got a phone call from the chairman of Bruichladdich. I said, the answer is yes. He said, really?
Very different people with different background and experience who all came together with the same goal of bringing this distillery back to life.
The most unlikely partnership in the history of whiskey.
It's hysterical. Jim revelled in the freedom that he was given, sometimes a little too much.
I could make virtually what I wanted.
There's a Bruichladdich every week, wasn't it? There's probably too many.
I said, "Why are you doing this?" And he looked at me with these wild eyes and said, "Because we can, and because we're having fun."
There aren't as many true mavericks anymore, learning quite literally from scratch.
Mark and I had many battles. We detonated.
Yeah, emotionally, it cost me a lot.
But we did it. We touched the void. Oh my God. How far can we go, you know?
Fascinating. That's a great trailer as well, Greg. I have to say, looking through there, it's like the obviously we saw a huge focus in that trailer on Mark Rainey and Jim McEwan, but you know, there's clips. There's a whole host of the who's who in whiskey. There are people that are recently into the scene, like Jenna. We see Jenna from SMWS or Whiskey A Go Girl Jenna. We see Ralphie there as well. You've really gone for quite a deep and wide spread of a cast of characters here, right?
Yeah, we wanted to kind of get a nice cross section that represented big and small, old and new. And one of the things that we wanted on every one of the whiskey makers was that they made hands-on whiskey. You know, and we actually, and to be honest with you, we filmed in probably 4 other distilleries that we wound up not really featuring in the film, and we're doing other stuff with the footage. We're actually making some web exclusives. I've been telling people when I've been doing some media stuff now that we're actually working on a sort of a partner film to this, all about the history of independent bottling.
Excellent.
Because I think it's a completely unique phenomenon, and
Yes.
so, and it would be done by now had I been able to come back. One of our partners there lives in Edinburgh, and he shoots things when he can. But we haven't been able, because I want to go to Adelphi, I want to go to Signatory, and I want to go to Cadenheads, because they're some of the ones I didn't get to shoot already. But,
and I think it'd be nice for you to reflect just how kind of almost uniquely Scottish that whole landscape is, because of the brokerage system, cask trading, and everything like that. Yeah. That's what created independent bottlings, and we're so grateful that it did as well. It gives us so much more access to single malts. Yeah. So, am I right that your first night live with this movie is tomorrow? Tell us how that's come about. I mean, obviously, as I said, everything was upended last year, Greg. What have you done to recover that kind of live launch that you had planned?
Well, so we started waiting, is what like everyone in the world did. We assumed, it'll be, but okay, not May, then June, then maybe July, and on and on and on. And finally, in November, we were frustrated and said, let's stop waiting. Let's do this ourselves. So our producer and I took a class, actually, an online class, of course, because that's what everything is now. Yeah. About online distribution of documentaries, and we were really inspired. And the ideas about how to do it seemed uniquely a good fit for a film about whiskey, because you basically we knew what the audience was already. It wasn't a drama story or something where we were trying to decide who would like this film. We knew who would like this film. So we decided to take it online, and we picked Burns Night we were going to just do it on Burns Night. And what happened was we showed everybody in the film, and the reaction from them was so positive that they all agreed to do Q&As and events with us. So we thought, well, we can't put 16 of them in one Zoom, or there's no benefit to anyone. So let's spread them out. So the movie's going to stream for 6 days, and people can watch the movie anytime they want if they buy a ticket. But the Q&As are every night at 9 p.m. GMT, because that's where everyone lives, except for Jenna.
Well, I tell you what, I've got a little screenshot grab here. If I pull this up and you just take us through, before we work out how we can go and engage with this, take us through what the schedule is. Would that be okay? I'll pull this up.
Yeah.
Can you see that, Greg?
I can, yes. And I'm glad it's there, because otherwise I always mix one up, or I'll get one wrong. So tomorrow night we're going to be joined for an hour with Jim McEwen, Adam Hannett, and Charles MacLean. Then Saturday, Mark Renier and Blair Bowman. And we actually are going to have Rachel McNeil join us as well. Excellent. I'm sorry. No. Sorry. Rachel McNeil. See, I already screwed up. Rachel McNeil's on Sunday. We do have a special surprise guest tomorrow night, or Saturday night, with Mark Renier and Blair Bowman, which is Jack Milroy. Is going to come on and talk with us.
Fantastic.
Then Sundays, Liam Hughes and Shug McMurray from the Glasgow Distillery, with myself and Rachel McNeil. And then, Rachel Barry and Jenna will be on Monday on Burns Night. Then Stephen Rankin and Josh Peters on Tuesday. And then the final night is David Stewart and Charlie again.
Wonderful stuff. I have to say, I'm intrigued by Saturday night now, but I think I'm leaning towards Wednesday night. I think I would just like to. We've got the Charlie MacLean thing there, of course, but David Stewart as well. I think that's an interesting one for me. So I might buy a wee ticket for Wednesday. But you've got a decent schedule there. There's going to be a lot of interesting Q&A, a lot of interesting chat. So tell us how it's going to be structured. We buy a ticket and then we watch the movie. How does it work?
Yeah, so the ticket is basically good for any time over the next 6 days to watch the film at your leisure. It's truly on demand. Once you buy a ticket starting tomorrow for 6 days, you can watch it at any time you choose. The Q&As will be for roughly an hour. No one's going to tell Jim McEwen he has to stop straight at the hour mark.
Right.
So, and then that's going to be a webinar format where people can ask questions in the chat, and we have someone processing the questions, and then I'll be on the panels talking. I'll be the voice of the people asking the questions. Although if people want to raise their hands, we may call on people and let them ask some questions as well.
Okay.
And the Sunday night one, the Liam Hughes and Shug McMurray, is kind of a unique one because the reason that I'm on that panel as opposed to sort of being the moderator is because before we shot the film, I worked there. Liam invited me to come work at the Glasgow Distillery. Yeah.
Excellent.
And Shug was their in-house cooper and my boss for the week. And so we're going to sort of talk about the hands-on experience of every day I did a different job from mashing into filling casks throughout the week. And I was a cooper for 4 hours. So
does our ticket cover us for the week?
Well, there's a 1-day ticket for the opening night only. And then the other ticket is the whole week. Yeah, there's 2 tickets available.
And does that cover us for all the Q&A sessions?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Now, is it wateroflifefilm.com?
Yes. And I will say the tickets are listed in dollars, but it'll take. We worked all this through beforehand. It'll take any currency. You know, it's all done through Shopify. I think it is. I don't really handle that side of it, so I'm pretty sure that. But we've had loads of people in Germany and Norway and UK and Australia and Indonesia buy tickets. So,
well, I think that's the wonderful thing about it, and it's the wonderful kind of added extra depth and advantage you get of doing the virtual thing. Nobody is excluded as long as they've got a data connection. They can participate.
Yes,
which is excellent. Honestly, I'm really excited by the trailer. I think it looks good. I think it seems to me, Greg, like it's going to be accessible for people that are fairly new, just coming into whiskey. And it's going to be something that the more enthusiasts, the whiskey geeks like myself, can feast on a little bit as well.
Well, we tried to do that, yes. And we tried to make it look like whiskey tastes. That was always the cinematographer and I always said we wanted to look like whiskey tastes.
So we should probably be sat somewhere comfortable at an appropriate time to have a dram in hand, is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, hopefully. I will.
Excellent. Greg, I hope that we can maybe see each other or maybe I'll manage to get a question through or something like that in one of the sessions. But I'm off to purchase a wee ticket and I hope to bump into some of the barflies and whiskey folk and things.
That'd be great.
What you're doing over the week. I wish you, Greg, the very, very best of luck with it. The best of luck with any kind of offshoots that come, partner programs and partner productions or whatever that you are able to devise as well. And keep us all up to speed with what you're doing there too.
I will. I absolutely will. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on at short notice and sharing it with us, Greg. I'm glad I reached out to you, and I wish you the very best for the week ahead, my friend.
Sláinte.
Cheers, Greg. Good luck. Cheers. Wonderful stuff. I had a couple of drams coming in. I don't want to miss these. Daniel Caballero is saying, already got my tickets for the Water of Life. Looking forward to it. Daniel, fantastic. Maybe I'll bump into you there in some form. Watchman is saying, please remind people of the times of the live Q&A. They were hard to find on the Water of Life website. Okay. That's a good point. I should have mentioned that, Watchman. I should have mentioned that when Greg was in. Greg, if you're able to type into the YouTube chat or even the chat here, inside StreamYard, there's a little chat function there. And 9 p.m. GMT, he's already on it. So that's UK time, 9 p.m. GMT, which will be 4 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Midwestern time, or Central, sorry. And Pacific time will obviously be 2 p.m. Every day, Greg is saying, and then watchable on recording after that. So even if you don't catch them live, you'll be able to watch the recording even better. There's some real advantages about the virtual world. Peter Wilcox is saying, hello, Roy and all the barflies, on a call with work this week, so no drams for me other than a drop of Lucozade. Pretty sure it's coloured, and there's not a lot on the nose, but cheers, everybody. Peter, needs must. The dram will taste all the sweeter when you do get to it, my friend. Cheers, thank you very much. And the dram was from Jimmy Legg is saying, hopefully this will turn into a trilogy. There you go, Greg. Jimmy Legg over in Canada is looking for sequels already. Alistair Gray has put the link in, just in case the link I was putting in earlier didn't work. It may not have worked. And Mark is saying, just bought my all-access ticket, Aqvavitae. Fantastic. I look forward to bumping into barflies in some form, or hearing your questions being asked in your voices for that movie. It looks fantastic. I'm sure you agree. I'm going to just share with you something quickly. This is what I was doing this afternoon. I had some whiskies cracked open, and I was trying to devise a little flight of 5 whiskies for Sean's blind challenge. This is an Aqvavitae Blind challenge. This is a blind challenge that I send out to other YouTube content creators out there in order for them to do a bit of an online challenge. They film themselves taking this challenge, and the first step is very much the whiskey on test. They rank their favourite first to last, and kind of lock that in, and then they go through a series of challenges and things just for a bit of fun. Once they've recorded it, they send the footage back to me unedited, and I edit it back into a video and send it back to them, and they share it on their channel. So the collaboration is very, very close, a lot of trust involved in things, but it's all for fun. And the last person to do it was Jason at Mash and Drum, who was on the show last year, and he nominated Sean. And I finally got the last piece of the puzzle to put this together last week. It's all prepared, ready to go, Sean. I hope you're looking forward to this. I'll get it shipped out, hopefully, tomorrow or Saturday morning. Wonderful stuff. Okay, actually, I'll just see if anybody's been trying to get my attention while I was distracted. Eric Cunliffe is saying he's signing up now for the movie. Fantastic. And everyone is asking what whiskey goes with popcorn. Any whiskey goes with popcorn. You can give the popcorn to your wife, the dog, whatever, and you get to enjoy the whiskey. I think any whiskey would go with popcorn, everyone, don't you think? Graham Fraser is saying, got an all-access ticket for everything, including the film, a bargain. And Actually is saying, malt whiskey and enlightenment thinkers, two of the biggest malt whiskey and enlightenment thinkers, two of the biggest contributions of your wee nation. Thank you very much, Actually. Thank you. You're over in France, of course, aren't you? Wonderful stuff. Let's get on to the topic for tonight. Let's work out how I got round to talking about flavour. As I mentioned earlier in the stream, there was quite a lot of discussions last year on the vPub revolving around flavour, that involved and focused on flavour. And the reason for that is that when everything is said and done, the thing I really love about whiskey, the thing that really has fired my passion for whiskey since the very first sip, where I had a sip of single malt whiskey for single malt's sake, was flavour. I was surprised at the flavour. Back then I couldn't define it. I didn't understand what I was tasting. I couldn't articulate it very easily, but I know I liked it and I wanted to learn more. I wanted to taste more. I wanted to chase more. So the flavour chase became a thing very, very early on, to the point that I couldn't help myself evangelizing to all my friends around my dining table. For years it was around the dining table. Back in the days, the before times when people could come around and sit at my dining table with me. But I've managed to convince pretty much all my friends to enjoy whiskey with me, and a lot of them are super passionate about it themselves now. And again, it's changing the relationship with alcohol, because they're not drinking anymore the way that they quaffed wine or drank beer or whatever. Whiskey is teaching them, we don't have to analyze every dram, not always, all the time, but whiskey is teaching them to slow down, to drink less and taste more. And I think that that's a fascinating thing. One night, and I know that you've heard me share this anecdote before, but one night I had a gentleman in the house, and he was here for the first time, and he was talking about whiskey. He was curious. He drank whiskey, usually with a mixer. And I had a selection of malts in front of him, and he was enjoying it. He was genuinely enjoying himself, but he was at that very, very green beginner stage. And he said, this is interesting, Roy, but honestly, I'm still only just tasting whiskey. What is it that you taste when you drink whiskey? What do you taste when you enjoy whiskey? And I almost without hesitation said, everything. And it wasn't me quipping or being glib. It was me being a wee bit kind of, I don't know, it was a bit of nonsense. But I went on to talk about it, and I went on to say, no, seriously, everything. There is nothing off the table when you're talking about flavors that you can unlock inside a glass of whiskey. Nothing. It got crazy. We exhausted everything that was food stuff, everything that was organic. We went on to chemicals and metals, and it just got crazy. And I said, even if I haven't tasted this in a glass of whiskey, even if I haven't picked up that aroma in a glass of whiskey, somebody probably has, and they've recorded it and shared notes or shared it with friends. Genuinely everything. So the flavour has got to be one of the biggest things that we chase in whiskey. It's wonderful. Then, over the course of enjoying those flavours, writing them down, trying to articulate them, trying to get better at tasting them, you start to realise that a lot of the things that you're enjoying are connected. There's common denominators between whiskies. There are things that you can trace back to a specific point in the whiskey making process. I was struck by something that Daniel Whittington came up with when he appeared on the show last year. And he talked about when he moved from just being into whiskey and enjoying whiskey and studying whiskey into distilling whiskey over there in Texas. When he moved into the distillation side of things, he was struck how he could start to taste how certain elements of the production process could be enjoyed in the glass. Now, these were not new flavors to him, but what he was able to do was to connect it to a point in the process. And that was fascinating to me. And I've had some experiences with you that I'll share again this evening as we talk about this, that I think I'm starting to do that. And even if I'm not doing it properly or connecting it, I'm starting to be intrigued by that thought process. I'm going to share with you another little clip right now. This is fascinating to me. There's a channel over in the States by two guys called Mike and Narbe, and the channel is called Malt Reviews. And they're not doing the same as every other reviewer out there on YouTube. They're doing a completely different thing altogether. The whiskies that they share tend to be really high end. I'm not speaking about exclusive, special, limited editions, although sometimes it is that. I'm speaking about unicorn whiskies and unicorn of unicorn whiskies. They're able to track down bottles or samples of these things and give us their words and give us a vicarious experience. I was watching them this week enjoying a 1972 Brora, and they were just standing there riffing into the camera. I took their video and I cut it down to just a very, very small snapshot of 20 minutes of them sharing into the camera what they were getting out of this Brora. And I felt like that video was a perfect example of the Flavour Chase, a perfect demonstration of what whiskey can do to people, that these two guys from the States are sitting in front of their camera and doing this. I'm going to share this with you. It's just their nosing. You'll see why I don't go into tasting notes and things like that, but listen to what they're getting just from the nose. I share with you Malt Reviews over on YouTube, Mike and Narbe.
What's happening, everyone?
What's up, guys? Malt review time.
Malt review time. A Douglas Lane, 1972. This bottle right here, 1972.
What's the distillery, though?
Sherry Brora.
Boom.
It's 1970.
Magical year.
You're getting rich notes like honey and toffee and some herbal teas and coffee. But the magic starts when you enter the farm world. You're getting those horse stables and wet dogs and sheep and grass and rhubarb and just rich and dark with the toffee and coffee and the honey.
Crazy farm notes. Got into sounds weird. You gotta know Brora to know it. You gotta know like crystallized cow manure. Almost like kind of that methane smell when you're pumping gasoline. How if you sweeten that, it can be this oddly addictive smell. It sounds weird, but it's like all that mixed, but it's like then tropical, like juicy apricots and peaches and plums and like super juicy mandarin oranges.
Yeah.
But then mixed with yeah, like he said, earth and tea and, oh my God, maybe that sherry sweetness, that rich, that dankiness. Almost like I didn't believe it at first when I heard people say this, but almost like a little like maple syrup, a little pancake maple syrup, combined with all the earthiness and exotic shit. It just hit me. Palate, it's fucking nuts. So unique.
Oh man, I took a bigger sip this time. Oh.
Absolutely wonderful stuff. Now, as if to prove my point, they're talking about cow manure, they're talking about wet dog and sheep as they go on through this kind of farm landscape. They talk about tropical apricots and peach and everything with this. And to anybody coming into whiskey, they would look at that and they would think, that's just nuts, that's just crazy. But we know better, don't we? It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going to drop a link to their channel in here just now. And I can see some of the comments coming through from you guys talking about these notes and things. Nothing is off the table when we're talking about whiskey. Now, I didn't share any of their tasting notes. If you want to see their tasting notes, if you want to see them kind of just riff, and they do get super excited about it. I mean, it's a 1972 Brora. They know what they're tasting. They know how privileged that is to get such a, even if it's just a small pour like they were enjoying, they know how difficult, how very few people get to sip at that altar. It's quite amazing. Drew from Arizona is saying, I don't think they wanted that to end. Absolutely, Drew. I think that's right. The Flavour Chase. The Flavour Chase is in. There's a guy on here whose name is the Flavour Chase. I did ask if it was okay to use his name to title the theme tonight, and he was okay with it. He said, we'll all be chasing crystallised cow manure now. And it's bizarre. We talk about shoe polish. We talk about metallic notes. We talk about all of these crazy things. But they're not meant in a bad way. These notes are in a good way. Eric Cunliffe is saying it's so wonderful to see these guys drinking and enjoying these whiskies instead of letting the bottles grow dusty on the shelf. Absolutely. Like I say, they just, any bottle that they get hold of, they're opening and they're sharing and giving us that vicarious experience. And when they can't get a bottle, they're doing what they did there and paying for samples of it. Jimmy Legacy, I always assume that I love whiskies that go deeper into the faints. I think that's true for you, Jimmy. I think you do like more funkier, stronger, bolder, heavier whiskies. Genuinely, I've picked that up from you. You love Campbelltown, for example. Great shout out for a great channel. Roy says Greg's Whiskey Guide. Greg's got his own channel as well. Fantastic content coming out in the YouTube community now, honestly. Everybody's sharing their experiences. Kevin Bryant is saying, hi, Roy. It didn't pick up one of the new Glenturret 12. But currently sipping on our Glenturret 2005 Douglas Lane Old Particular 12 sample instead. Very tasty it is too. Kevin, don't let that 12 pass you by. It's wonderful stuff. Mark Carell is saying, it's amazing how your brain records smells with memory. That's why I like whiskies with distillery funk. The divisive ones like Arran, Loch Lomond and Springbank. I find Arran more fruity. I find that easier. Loch Lomond, Ben Nevis, Ben Romac, Springbanks, all of the Campbelltowns, honestly. Kilkerran's probably the easiest, I think. These are all kind of quite challenging whiskies, maybe whiskies that you wouldn't immediately recommend to a beginner, but you never know. Sometimes it's the more overt, characterful flavours that hook people. People are, sometimes when they're coming into whiskey, they are not going to get all the subtleties that somebody that's a bit more experienced will get. They need hooks to get them in. And once they can contrast whiskies, sit them side by side and taste the differences, they start to realise that it's not smoke and mirrors, that there is something genuinely in it. I'm going to share this with you quickly. A lot of you are going to know exactly what this is, but this is something we should all be using to help us a wee bit. This usually hangs on my wall across there, but I've taken it off the wall tonight to share it with you. This is Charlie MacLean's Whiskey Wheel. You'll see even there's a wee dedication down here. And if you buy this from Charlie's website, Charlie MacLean is whiskeymax.co.uk, I think. If you do a Google search for Charlie MacLean, you'll find it. You can buy this. You can buy this and hang it on your wall. And if you leave a wee message, he'll do a dedication for you. He'll sign it for you as well. But if we go around his 8 segments of his whiskey wheel, and we kind of, well, let's start with the grain. Let's start with the grain itself. We've got the grainy notes here. Then it goes into the grassy notes, into the more fragrant, maybe floral notes, fruity notes here, peat smoke, woody notes, winey notes, again, more kind of cask elements here. And as Jimmy Legg was talking about there, off notes, or maybe you would call those faints as well. And as you're sipping a glass and you maybe feel like it's been a bit shy or you're not really engaging with it, you just kind of read these things and kind of consider each segment as you go around. Is it fruity? Is it floral? Is it quite challenging? Is it quite fainty? Is there some off notes in here? And down the bottom, I love this section down the bottom, one of my favourite sections actually, because he talks about texture. And as he calls it, he's talking about mouthfeel effects. And he's talking about warming, alcohol, fiery. He goes on to talk about spicy and astringent. And he talks about one of my favourites, and he's calling it spritzig. Spritzig. But he's talking about effervescence, fizzy sherbet notes as well. He talks about nose feel and primary tastes. And there's even a wee colour chart down the bottom. It's a fantastic prompt, a fantastic kind of visual cue, something to help you access those things. But as you're doing that, I think it's nice to kind of start to talk about or think about or share where in the process that's coming from. Is it the grain? I've been sipping on a mellow corn tonight, because that does a beautiful job of letting you know what corn whiskey tastes like. It's very inexpensive whiskey in the States. It's expensive to buy here. I've also been sipping on this really biscuity, malty, doughy Altmore. This sometimes I can taste, it's so cereal-like. It's almost like a dry cracker. Or Weetabix is a cereal that we have in the UK. And I've got a couple of examples here to talk about yeast and to talk about cask. But I can't talk about this topic on my own. So I reached out to somebody who's got grounding in cask selection and independent bottling with Adelphi. And in recent years, he's moved into distilling as well. And I'm going to welcome in Alex Bruce, the MD of Ardnamurchan Distillery at Adelphi, to step behind the bar at the vPub. Alex, welcome.
Thanks, Roy. How are you?
Fantastic. The audio is working as well. Are you comfortable, Alex? Are you doing well?
I'm very comfortable. I put lots of logs on the fire, so we're all good for the evening now.
You're in here for the evening. Fantastic. Listen, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thanks for stepping up to help me talk about this topic. And thanks for being so patient in the background as well while I was kind of monologuing away there. I'll dip in and out of the lounge into the live chat as we're chatting here, Alex. But I think, did any of the kind of things that I was sharing with you there strike a chord with you and your whiskey journey? Did you any of it hook you?
Absolutely. I mean, look, the two sort of areas of flavour, if you can split them, one is the how does flavour occur? You know, where does it come from? And I'm sure we'll look at some of that this evening. But the other one, which personally I think is more important for someone that loves whiskey, that loves enjoying a dram with friends, talking about it, and just talking about life in general, that side of it, which is, what do you get? And you've been talking tonight about everyone's personal interpretations of flavour. But really, I have to thank my mentor here, which he's appeared by name many times tonight already, Mr. MacLean. So Charlie, I inherited him when I joined Adelphi in 2004. Charlie he had been a director, but under the new ownership, he stepped down and remained as our head nose, if you like, chief nose. And I, coming from a wine background, I had to adapt to higher strength alcohol very quickly. And much of that adaptation was done under Charlie's tutelage. And he explained it so cleverly, which was, I mean, the scientific bit is that up here at the front of our brains, we have I think it's an olfactory system or olfactory bulb or something. And that is what processes what our nose is absorbing, basically. So it processes it, it stores it short term, and then it feeds it back to something, a lovely sounding name called the hippocampus, which is right in the sort of middle of the head. And that's our long-term retention of memory. You know, it's smells, it's emotion, it's whatever else. And then when you smell something again, the hippocampus chucks it back out at you and goes, "Oh, you've had that before." So what you're trying to do when you're actually nosing a whiskey is you're trying to recreate that previous experience. So you might have been rowing in a recently varnished boat, or walking up a beach or whatever. And that's what really fascinates me. It makes tasting and getting to flavors, explaining flavors, much more easy and much more fun.
Yes, and I mean, it's one of the things that, if we talk about subjectivity, if we obviously everything that we're going to talk about tonight, with the exception of a few obvious things like cask over spirit influence and things, but if we talk about subjectivity, we're not just speaking about how somebody interprets what apricot is. We're speaking about what apricot means to them in their life, how they remember apricot, the experiences that they've had in the past with that. One person's apricot can be someone else's canned pears. It can be a wee bit different. And one of the things I'm always trying to encourage on the channel is for folk to vocalize, because even if they make a mistake and somebody helps them get a bit closer, the best thing you can do is talk, is vocalize and be confident about saying what you think you're tasting, or just get as close to it as you can. But you mentioned there Charlie MacLean being your mentor. You mentioned coming from a wine background and having to build up to a stronger or higher strength alcohol. What is Alex Bruce's background then? And there's lots of people commenting on how un-Scottish your name is. I think there's a wee bit of sarcasm. But tell us, where does Alex Bruce come from? How did you end up? Because we're not even talking about Adelphi now. We're talking about you're at the coalface of distilling this product now. So we've come. There's that's a long way from selling wine. How did this happen, Alex?
Probably more luck than judgment, but it's been. I have been very lucky. I started straight out of uni with a placement with a cognac company in Paris. I was in the marketing department, so I was getting to learn about, Baccarat crystal bottles and all the sort of decadence that went into marketing luxury spirits. And I came home looking for a job in whiskey, but unfortunately we were just climbing our way out of the last slight issue, of lack of sales, shall we say, in the 1990s.
Yeah.
So I got into wine. Someone said, just get into alcohol however you can. I love wine. I'm sure most of us do, but I really enjoyed that part of the career. And then at one point, I was looking to buy some whiskey for our wine shop in Edinburgh, because we were adding a retail side to the wholesale. And I knew Jamie Walker, who owned Adelphi from the old days. So I rang him up and said, got to have some Adelphis. And he said, well, unfortunately, I've just sold the business yesterday to these two guys from the West Coast. So you'll have to go and talk to them. So that was a Friday, I think, Friday afternoon. And I met one on a Saturday and one on the Sunday. And on the Monday, accepted the job to join Adelphi. So it was a very
quick weekend that was.
Look, we had, that was 2004. We had 3 casks in stock and about 200.
Sorry, you had 3 casks.
Yeah.
Adelphi had 3 casks.
That was it.
So sorry, you were going to say 200 bottles?
Yeah, give or take 200 bottles of mixed stock.
So back in 2004, we're down at kind of what the industry would term nowadays is almost like an armchair bottler.
Very much so, yeah. And, Jamie would be the first person to say that he spent an inordinate amount of time with Charlie's help selecting the absolute, stellar drams that he really and Charlie really liked. I think the first Adelphi bottled, he had 3 casks of Springbank from the 1960s, 3 sherry butts, and he could only afford one of them. And so, they were scoring stupid scores, but he had to take the best, So yeah, he was an armchair bottler, but with a fantastic marketing ability, real kind of humble approach, just letting the whiskey speak for itself. Hence, the tiny, tiny labels, which everyone laughs at. It was all about seeing the whiskey, seeing the color, the natural color.
Yeah.
And he built it up. I mean, I think probably at its height in his time, it probably reached maybe 15, 20 casks a year in terms of quantity. And then, he'd wound it down a wee bit. He had to move away to a different country. But we hit the ground running, and it was just a single malt was really beginning to take off. And with that, single casks as well. So it wasn't very difficult for me to find demand, but it became a lot harder to find supply.
To find casks, which is going to take us on to obviously the next topic as well. Whiskey Throttle. That's Daniel from Canada. He was over to see us a couple of years back, and he's bought me a dram to say, can you believe Alex wouldn't let me take the Tesla for a test drive during our tour? Not even let me sit in it with an Ardnamurchan dram. So there you go. That's Daniel. He's a great guy, giving you a bit of a hard time there.
Yeah.
Jeremy Legacy, he's finding it very difficult to go back to wine since whiskey took over. Port does work, however. I think it depends on the moment and things. I mean, I think most people, food and wine still goes very. I know that whiskey and wine can too, but wine for me is an easier fit. And Multi-Mission is saying, you wouldn't happen to have some phone numbers for the folk at Cadenheads and Gordon McPhail? I don't know why he's grinning or asking. I don't know why you're asking, Menno. George Kaplan is in. Great to see you, George. And Mark Correll is saying, whilst exploring a 30-year-old Cameron Bridge with a friend, we both nosed it and immediately agreed on smelling Airfix glue from model airplane kits. I have to say that's a very common or a very similar theme for grain whiskey, Mark. You're not alone in picking up that kind of solventy, Airfix glue note. So before I ask you what took you from that scenario into distilling, let's pick that up. Mark Correll's. This is a common note, that kind of solventy thing. I tend to find it more in grain whiskies than I would in malt. I don't know if you would agree on that, but would you have any suspicion where that would come from, Alex?
No, I completely agree that it's we tend to see it in grain whiskies or find it in grain whiskies. Having not, I've visited a couple of grain distilleries and found them fascinating. North British, especially, the size of it, just crazy. I would imagine that a lot of it has to do with the higher strengths that they're distilling at. Now, you do get a similar, well, it's kind of vice versa. Grain whiskies can sometimes smell like rum, and rums can smell like grain whiskey. So there is a similar profile going on there. And I'm just wondering if it might be to do with the alcohol that the distillation brings in, if you like, the height of alcohol. But I don't know. Have you got any thoughts on that?
For me, no. I think that, and I know that the first question I ask you is nothing to do with malt at all. And obviously the reason that we're here, the reason that you're here is to talk about malt specifically. But for me, the solventy note is most common on, like we've suggested, grain. But if you're sipping a malt whiskey, a Scotch malt whiskey or whatever, especially a nice kind of sweet, easy, fruity style, and you pick up some world whiskies, the kind of solventy note can be overt there. And I have to say that after you sip it for a little while, it dissipates, it goes away. And you have to do that kind of contrast thing and go backwards and forwards to get to detect it again. And I would even say that I've had it on some bourbons. You say that to a bourbon drinker and they'd be like, nonsense, there's no way that, say, well, okay, but I think it's maybe if you're drinking malt and you suddenly, you can pick it up. It doesn't endure all the time. It can dissipate. And if we can enjoy things like wet cardboard and leather and cow manure and shoe polish and all these crazy things, we can get away with a wee bit of Airfix glue. It's not a problem, right?
It was crystallized cow manure, I think, which is the best bit about it.
Oh, listen, that was just a tease. I hope that people go back and watch Mike and Narbe's riff to camera when they actually start to taste the thing, and you see them; they can barely contain their excitement. They're just, and yeah, it does. They really do. They dig deep in the farmyard, let's say. Brilliant. So let's bring it back to malt a wee bit. So you're in Adelphi, you're having a good time at Adelphi. The timing's perfect there. There's demand for the casks. By the way, I have to say Adelphi gets a wonderful reputation. Anytime I've had Adelphi, I've certainly enjoyed my time with it. I think it's usually, in my experience, the outcomes that come from you guys are fantastic. But at some point you realise, and it's probably around about the mid-2000s, right, 2007, 2008, that kind of order, you realise this whiskey lock is drying pretty fast. Is that what kind of is that the push for you to consider becoming a distiller?
Absolutely. 2007, I think it was a meeting, and I just got back from somewhere like Germany and said, "Oh, you'd never guess, we bottled a Narbe. It wasn't particularly old, maybe a 1999 or something. You know, a youngish Ardbeg. It was a German whiskey fair in Essen, and given that Adelphi was still, you know, it had a name, but it still wasn't quite as established, if you like, as it is today. This whiskey fair in Essen, there'd been a publication saying, this is who's coming. So you got Adelphi, you've got whoever else, you know, all the different stands, and then a few whiskies of each table were basically listed. When the doors opened, within 5 minutes, there was a queue which went all the way through the building and out into the park that surrounded the building, 2 deep, basically, so side by side, coming for that Ardbeg. And we bottled it exclusively for that fair. So you had about 250 bottles, give or take. We sold out in 15 minutes, and that was at 1 bottle a head maximum. So I came home kind of, ecstatic, but also slightly with my tail between my legs, and said, you know, what are we going to do? We cannot sustain this now that supply is getting harder. So we had the options of looking to potentially secure an existing distillery, or maybe become more of a traditional independent bottler and start to build up stocks from new make, basically, and mature them.
Filling your own casks or something.
Yeah, Adelphi's always really been a just-in-time bottler. So that was the option 2, and then option 3 which was the kind of joke on the table, was let's go and build a distillery. We had one in Glasgow, 200 years ago. The same. It'll be easy.
Adelphi's a Glaswegian distillery, yes.
Yeah. And incredibly, we decided that option 3 was the one we really wanted to do. And there was a 4th option too, which was lock ourselves in the warehouse and drink what was left.
Surprisingly tempting. That's 2007. Just to frame this, 2007. Okay, but it was, to be honest, like 2014. I don't know.
Yeah, to be honest, it took us probably 2 or 3 years. We went out. We got a few tenders for building this distillery in this lovely remote place that was Ardnamurchan,
so it was always going to be up there on the Morven Peninsula. It was always going to be located there, right?
On one side or the other of the loch, so either Ardnamurchan or Morven.
Okay, sorry, Morven's the southern side, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yep.
And we had, I think, from memory, about 7 different sites, and we were looking at quality and quantity, of water. We were looking at potentially space to have a visitor centre, symbiotic relationships, with farmers, all that kind of stuff. And there was only one site that met all the criteria, which is the one we're on. But it did take us a few years. I do remember the early designs coming in with these monstrosities, these sort of 2 million, 3 million litre of alcohol distilleries, which you can never sustain up a single track road on the West Coast. And we kind of then paused slightly, and I was off on my travels again. I mean, I was traveling 5 months a year at that stage of Adelphi. And there was one particular trip when I was in Japan, and then I was in Australia, and I visited 2 of my favorite non-Scottish distilleries, both of which were fairly new at the time. One was Chichibu in Japan. Excellent. And I had a lovely tour with Ichiro. And then on the back of that, completely the opposite, in Melbourne in Australia, in their first building, which was an old aircraft hangar, was Starwood Distillery. And so I got the best of both, but both were fairly small. And, I could physically see and touch a small distillery that was operating really well and efficiently. So I brought all that back and said, we've got to do this, but we've got to do it much, much smaller.
I have to say, it's crazy that you mentioned Chichibu specifically in Starward, because they are celebrated. Even when it's detrimental to yield, they will chase and choose flavour first.
Well, especially Starwood. I mean, it's got a hot climate maturation, so it's going to have a product on the market so much quicker than we could ever dream, or Ichira could in Japan either. But yeah, no, they have that ability to play around with brewers' yeast, knowing that the yield's going to be a third of what we get in Scotland, but knowing that they can recoup their costs much more quickly. Yeah. So it's a balancing act. I've actually got one here, which I thought I might have a shot at tonight, just to try and prove to myself that my memory was correct.
What's this Starward that you have then?
Yeah, it was a single cask. I think it was in a Pera cask, so one of those Aussie Shiraz, Aussie sherry casks. They're about, I can't even remember how big they are. They're quite small, 100 litres or so. And this one was bottled for our importer in Australia. So that's a wee sample of it. But, lovely dark.
Yeah, wow. And quite high ABV it would be with the climate.
61. Yeah. So it's up there, and they normally gain in alcohol.
So what you've got is a rapid maturation with the climate. You've also got quite a small, quite active cask with the looks of the colour of that liquid there. I caught a comment from Precarious Dave saying, for your excellent guest, what inspired them to build a new distillery 3 hours and 40 minutes away from the old one, according to Google Maps? Couldn't they find anywhere more remote? Well, I think you covered that in terms of why you wanted to go up there on the West Coast. But it's as Dave's worked out, it's 3 hours and 40 minutes away. So to get up to Fort William's, probably, what is it, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours in itself, right? From Glasgow.
Mr. Google can drive pretty quickly, I think, by the sounds of things.
So you would struggle to get up there in 3:40?
Yeah, the first time you do it from Edinburgh to Glasgow, it's about 4 hours. When I'm commuting, which I do quite well, not the last few months, but normally I'm up and down, once or twice a month, and I'll leave really early in the morning, and you can do it in a comfortable 3 hours early in the morning.
And that probably, if we worked out with the miles, it's about, what is it, 140, 150 miles? What is it, mileage wise?
Yeah, it's no more than that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's how long it's taking you to get, that distance. It's how much of it is on small roads, B roads, or is used, if you mentioned, Alex, single track roads.
But it's stunning. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Over Rannoch, and then you got a ferry, you got the Corran ferry, then you're onto single track roads through the most amazing old oak forest. And it just, every corner, there's something to look at.
I think it's got to be one of the most picturesque distilleries as well. The views from there must be pretty spectacular too. I have to say, I would love to come up and visit at some point. But if we talk about then the whiskey you've got in hand, you also had, if I held up my corn whiskey there, my mellow corn here, talking about the mash and things, and how I enjoy being able to kind of taste the cereal. And there's some interesting kind of cereal elements in this Altmore as well. Like I say, there's a real biscuity thing. And I'm wondering, the sweetness in the corn whiskey tells me that it's corn, okay? I can detect that it's clear that it's corn whiskey to me. When I have something like this, Alex, this is much more, literally, I think I don't know if I've mentioned it live or before we were live, but this is like walking into a mash room. So when you've got that thing happening in the air, when the mash is at a particular point and the air is just thick with this really kind of grain, farmy, but somehow kind of bizarrely sweet kind of air, that's what this Altmore reminds me of. That's what it takes me. How is that happening? And I can probably use this moment to touch on the anecdote that we touched on a few days ago about the issue you had with barley. Are those kind of doughy, bready, cereally, biscuity notes fully at the hands of malt? Is that coming from the cereal itself?
Yeah, it's something that well, we didn't come across it by accident. It happened. Apparently, it happens quite a lot, but we really got it. So it must have been. I'm trying to think now. We're 2021. So it was 2019, and in 2018, as a distillery, we try and grow at least 50 to 60% of our barley on one farm, which just so happens to be the farm that surrounds Adelphi's bottling plant here in Fife.
In Fife.
So that's where my family's been farming for 400 years or something, and we've been making barley for Scotch whisky, malting barley for Scotch whisky for centuries. And as soon as we had the idea of Ardnamurchan, I went to the farmer here and I said, look, would you be interested in bringing some of these fields back, some of the acreage back into malting barley that we can then what's called toll through the maltsters, so we know we're getting it the exact amount or the exact barley that went into the malting comes out the other end. So the provenance is all the way through. So he just threw his hands in the air and said, absolutely. And every year we've built and built and built. We're now looking to try to get to 100%. And it's not so much that he can't do it here. It's about the middlemen. It's about the storage, the drying. Because as a distiller, we want it once a week. We want a truck once a week for 10 months before the next harvest. He wants it all out of his sheds, pretty much straight out of harvest. So there are a number of sort of logistical things we need to get in place. But in 2018, he said, would we mind if he moved from concerto, which is what most of the farmers had planted in Scotland for a number of years for whiskey, to one of the new varietals, which was Laureate, or Laureate, as it's sometimes called. Yeah. And I looked at the charts from our maltsters, and it appeared to be as good, if not better, in terms of yield, and certainly the flavour compounds as well. So we grew 100% with him, so 60% of our overall that year, but 100% Laureate with him. And after it had rested, it was first week of April 2019, and Gordon, who's our production manager up at Ardnamurchan, he rang me up on the second day that we'd moved over, and he said, we've lost our fruit. That's all he said, straight off. We've lost our fruit. And you can walk into our tun room, you can walk into most people's tun rooms, and you get this overpowering kind of.
So this is during mashing. We've lost our fruit.
Well, it's partly the mash, but it's then what's fermenting as well. Because it's that whole cycle. But he basically said it's gone from being this lovely fruity building to just kind of smelling of mash. We've lost the fruit basically. So he said, don't worry, we're on the case. We're referring to the late great Dr. Jim's notes. So Jim Swan had been very much helping me design the place in the first instance, and had come up on and off over the first sort of few months just to make sure we were doing what we wanted to do. And he left a little book, and just scribbled notes. And one of the things was, well, there was lots of things. There was kind of what to do if yield goes, what to do if this and that such happens. But one of them was what to do if you lose your fruit. Because Jim loved fruit. He loved that.
The plane is still flying, but it's lost an engine or two. There's some hydraulic issues, and the pilots pull out the little black book to work out and go through. You've got one of these books, right?
Yeah, someone chucked the bananas out the window. Yeah, I know. But look, and it said start at the. He said there's a number of things, but start at the mash. That's the most important thing for starting fruit, if you like, in the whole process. And one of the special design elements Jim had insisted on was when you recycle the wort to get it as clear as possible, because he said you have to have clear wort. We've got a little window in the recycling pipe, so we can see when it gets completely clear, and that's when we start to use it. So he said you can use your rakes in your semi-lighter mash tun, especially for peated, because we do peated and unpeated. But he said, if you start to lose fruit, you need to clarify that wort again. You need to get really clean. And the only way to do that is to basically stop raking. So for unpeated, we pretty much stopped using the rakes altogether with Laureate. And about 3-4 days later, Gordon's back on the phone and he said, it's like a bloody sweetie shop here.
The fruit came back, and that was just so that's just stop raking.
Yeah.
So if anybody's seen any of these mash tuns, you've got these kind of huge metal rakes going around to kind of I guess to stop it kind of compacting, right? It's just to keep it mixed.
Yeah, I mean, normally you'd rake a little bit to get it out at the end, to get the spent grains out into the trailer from the bed. But yeah, it's up to you. The liquid that's swirling around when everything starts to separate, if you want it really oily, then you want to keep that circulating. You want a dirty or a sort of oily wort. And we do want a little bit of that for our peated. But no, for fruit, you want crystal clear if you can get it.
Amazing, fascinating. So all you had to do was switch off the rakes.
Pretty much. It saves on electricity as well.
Must have been a few days worth of stress and panic, though, I can imagine. No doubt. Yeah. So I mean, if I hold up this Altmore, there's definitely lots of fruit here as well. But this kind of biscuity thing, would you lay that? I know that you're quite precious about barley. You've talked about how careful you were when you switched from Concerto to Laureate. You wanted to know the flavour compounds were going to be similar. I mean, it's worth asking, how important is barley to you?
So barley, as in the thing that grows, is hugely important to me. We try and concentrate on one main varietal. So Laureate's current. We've had Concerto in the past. I
happen to know, and we'll get to that soon. I happen to know, without asking you, the barley. What kind of barley is used in this, and we'll touch on that in a little while. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, Alex.
But we've also been pretty much since 2016, I think. We've been doing 1 month of Golden Promise as well, which is extraordinary. The flavors you get off that, completely different.
But the yield is much lower.
Sorry?
But the yield will be lower then, I guess?
Yield's down at about 380, 385 litres a ton. Normally we're getting over 400, well over 400. So yeah, you drop a fair amount. And it's also 20% more expensive to buy. So but it's a passion, to have Golden Promise maturing there. And I am also looking at in the future doing some very small batches of heritage crops and just playing around a little bit. We built the infrastructure for a small floor maltings at the distillery.
Yes, and
that will allow us, if we want to start taking direct from farm, and we could do just a couple of acres of something different.
And are you hoping that there's going to be some serendipity that comes in there, and the flavours that come from that exploration, whether it's Golden Promise or whether it's kind of heritage crops, I imagine like beer and things like that. You think there's serendipity, or do you think that you're actually chasing some kind of flavour from those crops?
I don't know. It's probably a mixture. I'm just fascinated by it. I'm fascinated that, I hate. Well, I don't hate, but I think the T word has been used too much for whiskey.
Terroir.
The French, yes. And I actually, I was discussing this. I think Dave Broom was writing a big article, and he asked me to put for some input. And I was thinking back to the wine days about the importance of terroir, the grapes, and how deep the vines are chucking their roots into the different types of soil, and how it doesn't really apply in that way to barley, because I don't think, as long as you can grow barley well, I don't think the actual field or the location is as important. Certainly not as important as where a vine is growing, put it that way. But one of the things which I had a real chuckle about with Dave was I was trying to find the derivation of terroir, or how many ways it's been used as a word. And there is actually a reference in an old Scots dictionary to it, and it translates it as terror. Up here we have the terror of the land. We don't know if it's going to be a 100-mile gale coming off the Atlantic or a tsunami, whereas
we've not really been able to grow many vines in Scotland, as far as I'm aware. That's the Scots interpretation, I guess. Yeah. So you're, I mean, obviously, because what we've already touched on is that your current crops, for the most part, are coming from around where you're located in Fife, processed, and then it ends up going out to the West Coast. And that kind of makes sense, because the East of Scotland, for anybody that doesn't know, East of Scotland is much more kind of fertile, much more agricultural, much more. I can't imagine that over where you are on the West Coast, there's a lot of barley fields over there. It's pretty brutal. That the ocean takes care of your climate over there, and it can be difficult. So it's clear then that for certain elements of the whiskey that you're trying to produce, that barley is going to be key. You've talked about how you handle that in the mash process, and how you're not directly generating any kind of fruit there in the wort, but you need the wort to be in a specific condition in order for it to carry forward to the fermentation, then in order for the fermentation to bring forward that fruit. So the type of barley that you're using and how it's handled in the process. And that's kind of hand in hand then, isn't it, that process? And you've touched on yeast. You mentioned yeast. Is yeast important to you? Are you experimenting with brewer's yeast or any kind of other kind of yeasts? And again, if we talk about yeast, one of the things that I've been struck by in the last year or so, specifically with this Loch Lomond Chardonnay, this is a very oddball release. This is Chardonnay wine yeast. But my goodness, not just the fruit, overt, loud, tropical confectionery fruit, but a lovely effervescence and a fizz and texture as well. So if we talk about that hand in hand, then the malt and going through to the fermentation, how important is the yeast side of things to kind of amp up or somehow convert or develop what's happened in the mash tun?
I like your description, amp up. It reminds me of that Spinal Tap, 11 out of 10 on the amplifier. No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. If you want to have fun with flavor, I think force is probably too strong a word, but if you want to really expand the flavor potential in different directions, yeast is going to be one of your biggest providers of different flavor. And I love what the guys at Dornach are doing. They're having great yeast. But I mean, it suits some distilleries, it doesn't suit others. I think that's probably the best way of looking at it. We've talked about Starwood, where they can play around and they can have a lot of fun. I mean, their new make is basically like a banana milkshake. It's so vivid in flavor. Other distilleries, and I'll use ours as an example because obviously I know it. One of the big reasons for building where we did was to have the climate surrounding us be part of our jigsaw, if you like, of flavor, and really just to concentrate on making the best spirit we could consistently, and then kind of giving it to nature to do the rest. So the Dunwich warehouses and just letting all that Atlantic gale force.
Ask you about that. I mean, when we talked about terroir, they're talking about environment and location as well.
Yeah, but like yeast is definitely going to give you is a big flavor impact.
What yeast are you using at Ardnamurchan right now?
So we use again, because of where we are, we're using distiller's yeast. We can't really use live yeast, if you like. I mean, we could potentially cultivate our own, but Christ knows what that would do for the consistency and yield. So we're using for our peated, we're using Anchor, which is a fairly standard one. In the industry, and then for our unpeated, we're using the Jim Swan Special combo, which is Anchor with a Belgian fermentis, which is very expensive.
That's a brewer's yeast then.
Yeah, it gives a lot of extra flavor.
Oh wow! So for the peated Anchor, and for the unpeated, a mix of Anchor and fermentis.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the fermenters get water added, gets stirred in before it gets pitched. So yeah, it's expensive, but it's worth it because you get some amazing flavors off that.
Well, I've got a clean glass here, and I have to say that as you're talking about this, I've tried this whiskey, Alex, and I want to compliment you on it, and I want to thank you for it. There's a couple of reasons I want to thank you for it, not just because it's really delicious, interesting, characterful whiskey, not just because you waited until it was ready. You waited until it was 5 years rather than. Must be tempting to take money out at 3. I know there's a lot of pressure, but I want to thank you for the way it was presented as well. Your inaugural launch was 16,000 bottles. 16,000 is huge, and you priced it at £45. And £45 for a launch whiskey. The message from you, the statement that I interpret from that, is this is a drinker's whiskey.
Yes.
That's priced to sell. Yes, it's our first release, but it's priced to sell, and we want people to open it and enjoy it. And I have to say that's happening. There's enough of it out there. Now, it has disappeared. I'm going to give you a hard time. I'm not selling this whiskey. Nobody can go out and buy this whiskey. It's gone. There are some people coming back to me from Canada and things. There's some people asking me about the 700ml thing in the States. But people are able to buy this in Canada now. It's made its way there recently. So in some markets, the supply chain, you might be able to pick this up. This is Ardnamurchan's, like I say, they're AD 920-01. 920 must be September 2020, right? And 01 would be batch 01. AD is Ardnamurchan, and I guess AD as well. But I'm going to pour a little bit of this in the glass as we talk about, you know, the yeast that's used here, the fact that you're making peated, the fact that you're making peated from anchor yeast, from a cloudy wort, unpeated from anchor and fermentus, from a clear wort for the fruity unpeated style and the peated style as well. And the peated style, that's where you're going to try and harvest and cultivate a lot more oils and a bit more weight, it sounds like, to the whiskey as well. What's really cool about this release is that it was at once unique, absolutely unique. The closest thing that this was to was maybe a little bit like the release from Kilkerran recently, that lovely dry note that it had, that kind of pebbly note, that kind of mineral note. I asked you before we went live, I said, where does the pebble note come from? Where does some people describe it as seashells, and I get that completely. Where does that come from? And it's interesting, based on the topic that we're talking about tonight, serendipity plays a hand, because you don't know.
No.
It's brine, a fresh brine.
Yeah, I've never had an argument on the subject, but I've had a lot of heated discussions about the importance of warehousing and the location of warehousing.
Yep.
Look, as I said earlier, all that we've done, and we'll stand by it, is we've put everything in Ardnamurchan to give us the best chance of it being a unique flavour. And we're not forcing it at any point. So we're not, the core product is never going to have, and again, nothing against them, but in terms of what we're trying to do, it's never going to have wine casks. It's never going to have fancy yeasts. It's going to be absolutely traditional in terms of the makeup, if you like, of the ingredients. And then it goes into the dunnage warehouses up the hill, and we let nature, let the angels basically invade the space.
The angels and the Atlantic, right? It must get pretty windy up there too.
It does. It gets very windy. It gets incredibly wet. I mean, the original warehouse, which is built into the back of the site. So the front of the site, it was basically a sloping field. It had a Highland cow in it and a telegraph pole. And at the front of the site, when we started digging, we found peat bog, marshland. So that was the perfect place to put the cooling pond, nice and soft, and we could go quite deep. And then as we moved back up towards the slope, we hit solid rock, and you're talking almost dynamite stage to get rid of it. There was a good lot of pecking with the digger, and he cleared enough space for two very important things. One was the warehouse, which by the time they laid it out, it actually made sense to have it on 2 levels because you could access the top from the back of the hill. Going around. So we had 2 very different environments. We had the lower level with a natural floor with water that comes running around the building constantly off the hill. So the humidity is perfect. Yep. Temperature never changes. It's always about 12. And then upstairs, you've got concrete floor. You're much closer to the roof. And you've got a temperature fluctuation of somewhere between 2 this time of year and about 30 in the height of summer.
Oh, wow.
And literally, if you walk in there in May or June when it's very hot up there, it almost knocks you out, the alcohol upstairs.
Wow.
So you've got quick maturation.
Does that mean that you're rotating stocks, or are you very much trying to kind of embrace almost that different maturation that's happening there? Interestingly, maturation, just the same as fermentation or mashing or distillation, maturation in these environments that we're talking about has a direct impact on these flavors that we're discussing tonight.
Well, it certainly does on this, because there's no way we're not getting it in the spirit. We're not getting that brininess in the spirit. So
now that's I wanted to ask you about this, because the amount maybe that's what you're talking about when you talk about heated discussions about salt not being able to permeate an oak cask. And yet we know as whiskey drinkers, even in blind tastings, you can pick up coastal elements.
Yeah.
A lot of whiskies. They're not have to be on the coast, but the coastal whiskies have this brininess.
Have you ever bought, in the good old days of Auto Trader, when it was a magazine, or Exchange and Mart, have you ever bought a banger from the West Coast?
Yeah, you knew that it was going to be riddled, right? You knew that it was going to be oxidized. It was going to be hanging together with elastoplast spit and excitement, and it was going to be on a short life. But if you got something from the sheltered borders or out in Berwick somewhere, you knew you had a better chance of having you're absolutely right. We're talking about salt just hanging in the air. We know it because we've been there and we've tasted it. We can taste it on our lips, on our skin. The salt is just hanging there. So are we saying that somehow it gets into the liquid, or somehow through the expansion and the contraction, especially on the upper level of the warehouse, that it's able to work its way into the liquid? Because it is definitely, look at Islay whiskies, the salty brininess is so overt that it can be tasted alongside the super, super powerful peat smoke.
You then have that counter argument, quite rightly, which is that a lot of the larger West Coast island distilleries don't mature on site, and yet they still have a salty character, or some of them do. So I think it's a combination. And I think, first of all, if you've got a proper Dunwich warehouse where you've got that atmosphere, the environment built up, with Angel's Share, it comes out the cask, it swirls around, it builds up over the years, you get the black mold, it gives as much as it takes. So if you've got that, you've got every chance of gaining something from the atmosphere, something from the humidity, which has basically come from outside anyway, from water on the ground or in the air. But I also think that it's potentially coming from the water itself. Now, like barley, water is often perceived to be the kind of marketing department's flavor compound rather than the reality.
Yes.
And I agree that, at the end of the process, the distillation end, you're boiling it, so there's not much flavor going to be there, or difference anyway. But in the filling store, when you're filling your casks and you're reducing from around 70 to 63.5% alcohol, if you're using your own lovely peaty, salty water off the hill, then that's definitely flavor going in there.
Do you use that water that's off the hill, or do you use demineralized water? Do you use preconditioned water?
No, we have 2 water sources. Normally, the river provides the cooling water. Before we've actually got an economizer now, so we can run on a kind of closed loop much of the year, because if funny enough, at that part of the world, it actually dries up for 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed to drain. That's the problem. We can actually see droughts there if we don't get rain, right? Yeah.
But anyway, cooling water in abundance from the Glenmore River, which is also giving our electricity as well through a hydro plant. But the process water, the water that we use for the mashing and all the rest of it, plus the reduction into cask, that is coming off the hill, and it's basically bubbling up through 3 or 4 springs high up the hill through the ancient peat bogs, and then trickling its way down. And before all the European legislation on UV filters and stuff like that, you could run a bath in Ardnamurchan and it looked like Coca-Cola. That's how much peat was in it.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Flavour there too.
So this has been reduced to filling strength with the water that's naturally there. Yeah. That's super interesting, and that brings another whole dynamic in as well. I've had a dram brought for me from, it looks like a new name, Ash Palmer, down in New Zealand. He's saying, absolutely loving this chat, sending best wishes for 2021 from New Zealand. Ash, you're very welcome in here. Thank you very much for the virtual dram. And I've already had a wee sip of this, but it's wonderful. Cheers, Ash. Thank you.
I've met Ash on a number of occasions.
You know him? Yes.
Yeah, he runs a very good whiskey business. I can't remember what town he's in, but I've seen a number of dram fests out there.
Fantastic. It's good to have him. It's the first time I've seen him in here. It's good to have him in here participating as well. I have to say that this is that minerally thing here. I didn't pick up on the seashell chat. I was kind of talking about. I was more in kind of the licking pebbles territory when I first tasted this, but the seashell thing is definitely there. It is fruity, it is salty, but more than anything, it's I don't know, we're at 140 distilleries now, Alex, across Scotland, malt distilleries. It's incredible. It's like boom time. And what's continually striking me is that the whiskey's almost taking care of itself. The flavour is developing. Now, Jim Swan's had his hand in a lot of distilleries. He's had his hand in places like, we had Anthony Wills on here from Kilhoman, talking about Jim's influence there. You could, you go everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's Islay whiskies, whether it's Highland whiskies, Speyside. These newer distilleries coming along, and they're bringing new things. It's new flavors, unique things. It's difficult for me to say, yeah, this is a little bit like something else. The closest I could get was a 16-year-old release from Kilkerran, because of that kind of dry mineral thing that's going on. Annock has a lovely dry mineral thing, often, Knockdhu distillery. But there's not, this is a kind of new take. And I think that's super exciting. You didn't design this. This is kind of end product, the whiskey taking care of itself, as I say.
One of the most fascinating, it was about 10 days I've ever had, was in July this year. So we were just been released, last year, just released from first lockdown. And Connell and myself were straight up to the distillery because we knew we wanted to launch single malt in September. So we had to get up there and sample casks, and we had to literally lock ourselves in the warehouses for about 10 days. We pulled about, 80, 90 samples, and we sat down and we went through them, and a number of things struck us. The consistency was number one, it was there, especially in the peated bourbons. It had this beautiful, almost, and we were talking earlier about cow manure and stuff. It wasn't quite that, but it was getting on to that slightly similar to a slightly young Kulila without the iodine. So old dairy farms, all the oyster shells and stuff like that. So we got all that part of the flavor spectrum, flavor wheel, and then we were getting the sweet oranges and bananas and stuff and honey coming from the unpeated. Then we were combining it to see what it came out like. But what I would say is that if you look at some of the individual casks, so if you look at them as single casks, which is, of course, we are as well, you're getting a huge concentration of flavor. And some of them, when I was chatting, I can't remember who it was the other day, there was one particular, we were looking at a refill sherry peated, and he said, if this had been given to me blind, I would have said it was a 10-year-old Talisker, but from last century.
Old school.
Old school Talisker. He said it's got all that salty, peppery character, and yet it's not Talisker. It's not. He just couldn't put a finger on it.
That's got to be exciting. And I know that you talked about for your core range product, for this kind of the thing that you're going to define yourself with, you're not going to mess around with wine casks and things like that. But I found that struck me as quite interesting, because every Ardnamurchan I'd tasted up until this release was using some kind of funky cask or an octave, or you were playing around with your young spirit in the early days. Will you be releasing single casks that go that take the spirit off in a completely different flavour direction?
Yeah, look, when I said about the wine cask, I meant for the core expression.
Yeah,
we're going to be traditional on that. We have, so in the very early days, we filled some experimental octaves, so 55-litre American oak sherry casks. And it wasn't so much designed for producing an early whiskey or an early release. It was more designed for our own in-house monitoring of how the spirit was maturing.
Yeah.
And if we were going to have to change it at all, or try and change it, because it had gone off in the wrong direction. But they ended up being so tasty so quickly that we did some of those early spirit release bottling, smaller casks.
And there are still some of those early releases out there you can buy. Some of the experimental things you released. Yep.
No, they're great fun. I mean, I've got a whole. I think I've still got one of each in my cupboard. One day we'll have a through all again. But no. And then the other things, what I've tended to do where possible, and this is all part of our traceability, if you like. I want to have as much control or as much input to the supply chain as I can. And we're not just talking what we do in-house, but where the raw materials come from, the barley, that kind of stuff. And I would include casks in this as well. So where we have gone a bit left field is we've started trying to go to source to get special sherry casks, some specific wine casks. So we've got a very good friendship we built up with a tiny family-owned champagne house not far from Krug in Le Mesnil. And they basically have this extraordinary cellar where the process involves 10 unique barrels, barrique, every year, each with different toasting on every different stave. And the customer gets to choose the toasting levels of each stave. So each cask is different. And during the process of making champagne, obviously, it spends some time in oak or in wood. Yep. So these casks are used for that. They're actually on motorized wires so that they're mechanically turned the whole time.
To keep them in contact with the...
But anyway, once that part of the process is over, and then they go into bottle and the dosage and all the rest of it, those casks are now then shipped up to Ardnamurchan every year. So we get 10 barrique from Paul Landois.
With kind of, I can imagine some kind of multicolored stave arrangement on the inside. And what you call it? Are you just calling these barriques or champagne barriques or?
So you can't call them champagne because it's obviously it's like
okay, yes,
PI status. But it's actually technically it's not champagne; it's a Chardonnay. At that stage, well, they grow Chardonnay rather than Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier. So it's basically a Chardonnay barrique, and we finished because I was a bit wary how active these casks would be. So we finished some 2014 bourbon barrels unpeated for a year in the first ones, and we are about to release, hopefully, a special, the first of what will hopefully be a regular special Ardnamurchan Paul Landois finish. So we will build that every year because obviously we get 10 fresh ones every year, but the refills, once we've used them once, then go back into stock as well. So we can start to build the volume as years go on. And what we are going to do is we're going to use the refills for new make. So we will do a full maturation.
Full maturation as well. Amazing. Wonderful stuff.
That's one project. And we've got a number of others kicking off. But if you look at the whole, we're talking no more than 10% in different styles, different types. The rest of it's 65 bourbon and basically 35 sherry.
65-35.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, just before I go on, I'm going to share a dram of this with a couple of folk in the chat. Bruno Melo's bought me a dram as well. Bruno, thank you very, very much. No comment or anything. My friend out there in Portugal, thank you, Bruno. Obrigado. Cheers. I'm going to share a couple of these drams and share it out with people who haven't had the chance to get their hands on a wee Ardnamurchan. But I'm going to demonstrate something that I thought was very cool. Of course, I knew the concept before I actually tried it out for myself. But on the back here of this bottle, you're going to see this QR code here. This is a blockchain system that's in place here. So theoretically, this should be able to tell us lots and lots, perhaps to some eyes and ears maybe a bit too much, but let's go with it because I think it's great fun. So what I'm going to do just now is I'm going to scan here this QR code, and it immediately comes up and asks me if I want to open a link on my phone. And it takes me off to an Ardnamurchan site through a gateway. I have to say that I'm over the legal age of drinking. And it tells me that my bottle number is bottle 1400-969 from a batch of 15978, almost 1600 bottles. And then it gives me the option to discover complete traceability here. So if I tap this, discover complete traceability, I have the ability to drill down about the barley. And I want to ask you about this because this is interesting to me. Mashing, mash water temperature. You can click and drill down into getting all of these details. Fermentation, hours of fermentation for this batch. Let's tap on this. It's loading up and it tells me, or Gordon McKenzie is telling me that the average fermentation time for this batch was 76 hours. And then it goes on to tell me about distillation and maturation. And the fascinating thing, just on what Alex was sharing there and talking about, it pulls up a PDF with a full breakdown, bourbon, unpeated, American barrels or ex-bourbon peated, goes all the way down. It starts to talk about Spanish oaks, Oloroso, PX, talks about American oak in there as well for some of this, for the hogsheads. Fascinating detail. And you've touched upon that there's even more that you want to do that. There's even more information that you can share in the future. Surely things like this, and this is a wee bit like the industry, some of the practices that MacLean are doing, some of the things that are coming out of the skunk works that is Kilkerran down in Campbelltown, some of the things that you guys are doing, showing established people in the industry what can be done. I think that now I know you have the advantage of being new and coming at this from afresh. You're not trying to re-engineer old traditional or let's say incumbent systems, but you're showing that these things that can be done, and more than that, that there's a value and there's a relevance to them. Was the blockchain thing going to be there from the start, or did you just take advantage of an incidental feature?
So it's partly going back to what I said earlier about more luck than judgment.
Which you've got to embrace, let's be honest.
Also, it's something, it's always in the back of my mind. And I suppose there's a kind of theme about what we're trying to do, is not to be gimmicky, but to have some relevance at any given point. And blockchain, I mean, I knew nothing. I still don't know much about blockchain at all. But it was back in 2015, 2016. I was listening to a pitch in a food and drink seminar of someone who said we can trace basically a pig from the farm to the pork chop you buy in the supermarket using blockchain. Because I'd only heard of it for cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and stuff like that. So basically, my ears pricked up and I read up about it, and then I contacted the company who were based in Edinburgh, and I said, have you thought about that for whiskey, for Scotch whiskey? And they said, well, no, we haven't. And I said, well, look, the one big failing, as far as I can see, is that blockchain was designed to bypass authority. So if we take the currencies, for example, it was designed to allow you to trade money without going to a bank.
Yeah.
So without that establishment in the middle where we all believe is safe, if you like. And I said, so your one potential failing in terms of food or drink or whatever is that the information going in could be falsified. And once it's in there, it's locked in. It's incorruptible. You can't change it. But who's monitoring what the big pharma's saying? Who's monitoring, the data going in? And I said, the great thing about Scotch whisky is that we are monitored every time we breathe by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So we have a natural auditor, we have a natural authenticator. And so they got really excited by this as well. And we became their kind of guinea pig or pilot. And we started working. And to be honest, the most important bit from my point of view was to build a live stock system, not just for production, maturation, but also back down to the cask suppliers, the barley and all the rest of it. So everyone's feeding their inputs in. And when it gets to the casks maturing in the warehouse, every single one of them has its own code. It's like a sort of locked-in digital DNA, if you like.
Well, let's imagine then that because even this batch that I have here, this is a vatting. It's a vatting, and you're going to continue pulling casks and vatting for these core releases in the future. Let's take barley, the raw ingredient. Some of it is going to be Concerto and some of it is going to be Laureate, right?
Yeah.
Will it tell us that? Will it say that X percent is this? And so
every cask, as I say, will have its own individual DNA. So when that cask goes into the vat, along with the other 55 or 60 or however many it's going to be, that information is then uploaded, and basically the code gets registered with that information once it's on the bottle. Once the bottling is complete, we register code 1 to code 16,000. And
how does the Scotch Whisky Association view this?
So I haven't been to see them for a bit about it. The early days I knew how to use the coffee machine quite well, SWA.
Yeah.
I don't know, to be honest. I think genuinely they see some efficiencies here, potentially with linking up with HMRC in a much more efficient way. So rather than all the paperwork that has to be done nowadays, potentially even duty stamps, getting rid of them in the future, trying to digitize everything. It could do that. However, I mean, there is one area where I think we, as a new distiller, and just the ethos of us as a company, we want to be wholly transparent. We don't want to pull any shutters across, or we want everyone to see what we're doing. And I think some of that, especially when it gets into younger stage of spirit and all that kind of stuff, that's when it starts to cross potential boundaries of law that the SWA then has to govern, or at least look at. So yeah, it's kind of like any technology. You get advances, and you have to wait for the other bit to catch up. But I'm very happy that we've done it, and yeah.
So there's leading edge and there's bleeding edge, right, Alex? Bill Monteith from Oklahoma has bought me a wee dram as well. Bill, thank you very much. It's always nice to welcome you, my friend. Cheers, my friend. Thank you. I have to say, and I remember this being, I got a sample from the community. It was involved in a tasting that I did one night, and I had bought your wee tasting pack when I bought this bottle as well, so there was a sample in with that. And I remember it being Moorish, but I know that this is a bottle I'm going to get through quite quickly, which is a problem, Alex, because the thing's sold out now. And I know that you did your best. 16,000 was probably, you were maybe worried that it was a bit too much at some point, but obviously now there was a stooshy for it. Everybody was tearing off their pals' arms and beating each other up over trying to get their hands on this, and it ended up as a secondary market thing. The secondary market's come down a wee bit again. It's affordable. If you can access auctions, you will be able to pick up batch 1. Tell us that batch 2 is on the way.
I've actually got a sample of it somewhere. It's not here. It's
I caught an Instagram story earlier this week.
It's when I left the office this afternoon, I think we were something like 8,000 bottles in.
Okay, so it's bottling now.
So we're hoping to have it starting to come out by roughly the end of the month, beginning of next month.
Excellent. Okay, so we're in this month, and this is the UK we're speaking about now. Obviously, this is kind of more local availability by the end of January.
Yeah, I mean, it will certainly reach the UK quicker, especially with the Brexit shenanigans. Logistics are taking longer, but it's going out to as many markets as the first one. So it's about 25 markets around the world. It will be going to similar batch size, very slightly larger. I think we're getting just over 16,000 this time.
And are you imagining the same price level as well?
Same price, yep.
Okay, so you're fully committed to this being an affordable drinkers product. 16,000 bottle, 17,000 bottle release, which is fantastic, and being affordable. I have to say that people need to approach this as a really if they come into this expecting very young spirity, they do get a bit of that, but I think it already is playing a wee bit older than its age, and also think it's far more interesting as well. But the biggest tale I can already predict by how Moorish it is in the glass is how quickly you'll go through a bottle, and I predict that I'll be enjoying this. I'm going to get through some right now. Have you got a question? Have you got anything that you've been able to come up with that you can ask? As you've been chatting, you gave me a question, but go ahead, Alex, if you've got anything that we can ask the barflies in the lounge, and I'll share some of my whiskey with them. Please only answer if you haven't had the chance to connect with or buy a bottle of Ardnamurchan. If you've not been able to try it, that's the people I want to get it in the hands of, the people who haven't been able to taste it yet. Anybody can answer. You have to be of legal age of drinking wherever you are. I have to find a way to legally get this thing to you. If it's illegal for me to get it to you, perhaps you shouldn't answer to, but I'd love to share a dram or two with some of you. Have you got a question in mind, Alex, that we could ask?
Yeah, I'm going to make it. It's not too difficult.
Okay.
I don't quite know how the replies work, but part of the education around Ardnamurchan, not simply the whiskey itself, was to try and get people to pronounce it correctly. And we actually got into a bit of trouble with someone on, I can't remember where it was, Instagram or Twitter. We put the phonetic spelling of it on the box, but it was a phonetic spelling that was designed to be multilingual, so to travel, with the whiskey around the world. That's what Scotch whiskey around the world. So it probably wasn't the exact phonetic correct spelling, if you were doing it for someone speaking English. Anyway, we did the phonetic spelling. It got people pronouncing it in Taiwan, in Japan, and so on correctly. And we also put a translation. Now, there are many translations. There are at least 3 or 4 that I've heard of what Ardnamurchan means. But the one we've chosen, that's my question. What is it?
What does Ardnamurchan translate to? People are going to be Googling. MacLean Fine and Rare has brought up an absolute point that I agree with. He said stinky box. It is a stinky box. We've talked about packaging on the channel. Everybody knows my opinion. I take the packaging and I toss it. It's gone. Look over that's the box there. If you look over my shoulder, you can't see just now because it's cropped, but most of my bottles are open. I like to see the colour of the whiskey. I like to see the level. I prefer the bottle and the whiskey over the packaging. I don't mind that it's stinky because it's recyclable, and it's sustainable packaging, so I don't really care about the stinky box. What I would say is that if you are putting your whiskey in a stinky box, and when the bottle's open, then you've got to deal with the stinky box every single time you pour a dram. Get rid of the packaging, or better still, Alex, give us an option. Give us 50p or £1 off the bottle if we choose to buy it without the stinky box.
I think we've had this discussion before. We were very close to not having a box at all. It was more just to protect the label.
James McGoran does indeed win, because I know this to be your translation. It might have been a quiz question tonight, but fortunately it's not. I didn't think about it. I thought it was too hard. It was too difficult a question. But James McGoran is saying headland of the Great Seas. So James McGoran got it. James McGoran and Lee Hosey got it as well. Lee Hosey is saying headland of the Great Seas, and Helen as well. Helen and Andy down south also got it. I'm going to ask a question too. So that's 3 drams going out to you guys. For another 3 drams, I want somebody, the first 3 people, to type in what the water source, the river water source is. It's been mentioned here tonight. Alex has already shared it. So the first 3 people to tell us the name of the river that Ardnamurchan are using as their process water source. Drams and Draws said Headland of the Great Seas, just outside, buddy. See if you can get the water source and grab yourself a dram. Drew from Arizona is saying a banana peel question. No, I don't think so, Drew. Straightforward enough. He did mention it. Kresimir is in with Glenmore. The sniper is in. Sniper King Kresimir is in, and who else? Oh, Drew, that's close enough. Drew, that's close enough. Drew from Arizona saying Glenmoe. You hit the enter button before he put the RE on. Andrew Pears as well. Andrew, I've just shipped a package to you. Andrew and Drew from Arizona. And Yash. I'm going to send a 4th dram and send a wee dram to you as well. Andrew Spurrell just misses out. Andrew, if you're here for long enough, you'll find a way to share something with you in the future, my friend. So there you go. I'm going to get a chance to share. I hope I've got enough sample bottles left for that. I'm pulling the company I usually buy the samples from, and they're out of stock of everything. There's too much sharing going on while we're all locked up at home, Alex. So, you know, and as we just before we quickly, Kilted Moose Scott Monroe's in and he's bought me a dram on puppy duty tonight, so couldn't join in with the chat. Look forward to catching the replay. Cheers to you, Roy, Alex, and all the barflies. Scotty, it's really nice to have you in, whether it's here live or on the replay. I know that Magnus needs a bit of your attention as well, buddy. I hope you're doing well. Cheers, Scott. Magnus is a Kilted Moose's whippet, who's currently bouncing off the walls, no doubt, around the house. What we haven't touched on is kind of, we've talked about barley, we've talked about that fermentation, we've talked about how actually the mashing and the fermentation is inextricably linked. That wee anecdote that you shared with us was a fantastic way to illustrate that. I want to shout out to Matthew at the Good Spirits Company for giving me a heads up on that. He was doing a delivery here last week and he said, ask Alex about the mashing when he lost the fruit. So that's fantastic. But it's interesting how they are completely linked and how one affects the other, and that makes sense. If we want to find out about the distillation at Ardnamurchan, we can that little scan of the QR code is amazing because it can tell us the details about that. When we talk about Jimmy Legg, wanting he's more challenging, more fainty, more challenging notes. What are your cut points? Certainly the flavour of this whiskey seems like it's in a safe zone to me. Are you pushing in any direction or are you bang in the middle?
We're high.
You're high.
Again, the Jim's one, the peated is high and the unpeated is very slightly lower, but still pretty high. And, you know, I've got in front of me, I've got an analysis that we get done every few weeks. And just looking, because they send you a list of flavors, but they also send you a chemical analysis and they send you a spider diagram. And fainty is on the left of the spider diagram. We've got a massive chunk out. There's nothing. There's no sulfur. There's no faintiness at all. We are getting oiliness coming in, but that's coming in on the peated, you know, from the mash. But we're mainly on the malty side, the cereal side, floral, fruity, sweet. That's kind of where we're aiming for.
I have to say, it plays to me like a very bright, fresh thing. It's quite a clean whiskey. You know, that kind of mineral thing is very much on the palate. I would say that the dryness is more forward to me personally than any kind of oiliness. I mean, it is oily, but it's more of a kind of dry experience. And I enjoy that. And I do find that when I'm enjoying a dry whiskey, I tend to find that it is moreish. It kind of makes me want to go back and have a wee bit more. That kind of, I seem to be drawn to dry whiskies. I do like them. Gal Shawn, can you please ask what peat they are using? Well, I guess that's from your malt supplier, I would guess.
Yeah. So it's Highland peat. It's not Highland. It's not Isla. It's from it'll be Speyside and north of Inverness, I'd imagine. It's all Highland.
Highland peat.
Highland
I hope
peat.
that helps, Galshawn. Eric Unliff is saying, I just purchased my bottle of the inaugural release. Eric is actually out in Canada. I think he's in Alberta, so he's got quite a good selection out there. Limited to one per customer. I'd be delighted to share it with any fellow Canadians. One more, first three, or random. I tell you what, Eric, if you want to do that, if all you have to do is the ones that I cut short, if you pick up any Canadians in there or any people from Canada, can connect direct with Eric and do a wee sample exchange or something, because it's really, really difficult to get even samples of whiskey into Canada. It's a bit of it's like trying to share whiskey with another planet in the solar system. Sometimes it's pretty tricky. That's really nice of you, and it's a very generous gesture. Eric, well done. Gordon Dardas is saying fabulous insights from Mr. Bruce. Nice to see you in, Gordon. I hope you're doing very well, my friend. I hope you're doing well. Everyone is saying, how did Ardnamurchan pick their flavour profile? I think that's what we're saying, everyone. They kind of went for a zone, but beyond that, it seems to have taken care of itself. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, right back at the beginning, if anyone asked, what do you want? I said, well, if you've got a bucket with some Clynelish, Talisker, potentially a little bit of Springbank in there, then that's kind of what we want. We want a traditional West Coast Highland, but I love that waxiness you get from Clynelish as well, and Deanston and other places. And it's definitely developing. So now we're very happy with what we've ended up with. It's right on what it should be, I think, for the area.
Fantastic. There's lots of discussions going backwards and forwards. Cresimir, I've picked up that you've got some, so you would like me to send the Ardnamurchan to Frank Geertz, to Peathead. I'll take care of that for you. Kevin Grant is saying, does Alex have a glass bottle and know what the future holds as an age statements on the whiskey and what the ABV will be through the range? I think you've already put your best foot forward here. There's no age statement on this bottle, but we can tell exactly down to the individual barrel what age this whiskey is through the blockchain scan of the QR code. So for the geeks, all of that's in place. 46% ABV as well. Do you actually write on? Do you place on the bottle the non-chill filter natural color thing? Is it on here?
Well, actually, I don't know. We do, you know.
Oh, that's some points deducted, Alex. Points deducted.
We might have to do that in the future. Thank you. Well noted.
I think it's a bit too late for batch 2, but
on the strength, 46.8 is what we came up with on strength, and that was just a flavour thing again. It was gradual addition of water until we felt that it hit the right spot in terms of accessibility, but also keeping a bit of texture. And in terms of age statements, well, you've hit the nail on the head in about the blockchain. It's more informative than a number on the bottle. What I would say is we are not going to be beholden to an age profile. So I'm not going to say there will be an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old. I'm going to say that when we see the next step change in flavor development through maturation, we will release the next core expression at whatever age that is. So it might be. I have
to say though, Alex, I can understand it completely. When the whiskey's this tasty, and when the transparency is at that level, it's a moot point. To demand age statements and thing. I mean, you don't need to go, as long as you've got a smartphone, you can discover down to the cask what's involved here.
I have a brainwave, but I woke up. It was probably a dream actually, and I woke up and killed it pretty quickly. Which was that we could have an RFID chip or something similar, so that when you walk past a bottle of Ardnamurchan in a shop, it actually sent you a text and said, "Did you know this is what?" And then I realised that the average age of smartphone users is probably well under 18, and possibly that might be not too.
I think it's changing rapidly, and I think you'd be amazed at how much the impact of lockdown has forced the embracement of technology further up the kind of age profile. Yeah. We've got grandparents and older people here picking up tablets and smartphones now and things. But there is that is changing. It's becoming at the point that if somebody doesn't have a smartphone, it's kind of almost a surprise, right? It's Jimmy Legacy, whatever age it is, will you put the number on the bottle? Jimmy, again, we're talking about it where all you have to do is just wave your camera at that QR code and you're spoiled for choice in terms of information. If I looked at this one, and I know that inside this we have casks from 2014 and 2015 in this. So the youngest component in this is 5 years old. There are some 6-year-old casks in here as well. So I didn't even need to ask Alex that. It's all available. The detail that it goes into now through this is really quite interesting. And if Alex is interested in taking that further, I think it's really quite a cool thing. Put it this way, it satisfies the geek in me. It tells me more than I need to know. Molasses is in and he's saying the tinfoil hat people would go insane. Absolutely, Moa, no doubt. And Stewie Baby is saying, does the website with the QR code not mention non-chill filtration and non-colour? And Jimmy Legg is asking on that point, do you not watch Ralphie, Alex? Come on. You know, it's the ABCDs that on this channel, Ralphie talks about integrity bottlings. He's right. We talk about ABCDs on this. A for age statement. You've covered that with the QR code. B for bottling strength, 46.8%, fantastic. And that means it takes care of C, chill filtration. It's not chill filtered. And D for dye. Well, you wouldn't be on this channel talking about this whiskey if you coloured them. So,
right. The problem is, coming from an independent bottling background, everything we do is unchill filtered, natural colour. So we just kind of forget about it. We just assume that it's a norm. That's the trouble.
It's taken as read, absolutely. Natural presentation.
It's a good point. I think we will probably have to find a space on the label or in the blockchain.
Yes, listen, I want to pick you up on that as quickly. I know you take a lot of flack for the Adelphi labels, and I don't think it's nothing to do with the size of the labels. I'm 50 now and I'm wearing glasses. It's everything to do with the size of the font. So legibility is definitely a thing. Let me tell you, when you start looking at a whiskey bottle and you have to do this, you know.
If you go back to 1992 when Adelphi started as an independent, there were so few things that you had to, by law, put on a label. And over the years, I've had to add more and more text, and I can't increase the size of the label. So we actually had to bring a back label in for Adelphi a couple of years back, just to cover off other stuff.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And I think you've gone for the same thing here. You've gone for transparent branding here so that people can see the liquid inside the bottle and things. I think I have to say it's very middle of the road, understated. It's a nice, solid presentation. I quite like it. I'm excited about the future for you. I really am. And I'm excited about where you're able to take that flavour as well. We didn't even get to touch on tonight too much about how much flavour is going to be coming from casks. But I know that we can see again from that blockchain interrogation, we know how much percentage of sherry goes into this as well. Sherry mature product versus bourbon. It's fascinating. You can see down to the cask size what's gone into the vatting here. So we know how much ex sherry has gone in versus bourbon, and we can see that this is the, let's say, the core style.
I mean, it's quite interesting putting batch 2 together. We were, it was the second hardest thing we had to do after putting batch 1 together. It was hoping that it would be the same or similar, with consistency. And I have to say, it's very, very similar. If we were going to nitpick and try and find a divergence, it's possibly got a tiny bit more sherried influence, batch 2. It's got a bit of a richer palate to it.
That's interesting.
And possibly slightly less smoke, but maybe the smoke is just being masked by a bit more cherry influence. I don't know. But
I enjoy the smoke. I love that Highland style. I love the fact that, and I know that you're going from, it's around about 30 ppm. Your phenol content is about 30, so it's a bit more overt than a Bowmore, but it's nothing like an Ardbeg. And because you're vatting it together with peated and unpeated, what we have is this nice kind of middle of the road thing, which I think is got to be one of my favourite styles, and it's that Highland style of peated whiskey, where it's not like the kind of Islay and the West Coast super peaty. It's nicely peated, where the peat adds that nice kind of savoury element to the whiskey. I think that's quite interesting as well. I think there needs to be more of that. So many distilleries offering a peated style and an unpeated style. it's kind of nice. And we play at home. We often mix these things at home to see what we can come up with.
It's a fairly traditional way of doing it. I mean, most distilleries who produced a-peated whiskey quite often did unpeated or varying phenol levels, because at the end of the day, they had to give their blending team more flexibility in terms of picking the right blocks to get back to that consistent product. So it's not there's nothing new or different about it. It's been going that way of making whiskey has been happening a lot over the years.
And what you talked about with batch 2 then being slightly backing off, just a notch on the smoke, maybe increasing a notch on the sherried, maybe bringing a bit more of a richer profile. That's interesting to me as well, because we're not in the days of Johnny Walker's, Andrew Ushers and things like that. We are very much embracing batch variation. We don't need to have a consistent product year after year after year. It's okay when your main audience, when your main consumer, when your main customer is going to be people that are a wee bit more knowledgeable, people that are a wee bit more invested in the whiskey, a bit more of an enthusiast. They're going to enjoy the fact that it switches up batch to batch. Just look at the torchbearers down in Campbelltown. Look at anybody that's bringing out these things that's sometimes it doesn't in any way resemble the previous one. And they've taught us to embrace that wonderful organic nature of whiskey and the fact that it's matured inside another organic vessel. Just 2 minutes. I can see that Greg Swartz has just dropped back in as well. He might be joining us for the quiz, which would be amazing. A couple of questions. Daniel is saying, I'm going to have to leave to go home to keep up the good work. That's because the quiz is coming. Daniel, you big blight. Stay for a wee while and see how you get on with the quiz tonight, my friend. I know that you're probably working. I know what time it is over in Canada, Daniel. It's always great to have you in. And Whiskey Radar is suggesting that I get out my steampunker magnifying glass like Ralphie as well. I don't reach for the magnifying glass, but I do go for the magnifier on the phone from time to time. Graham Fraser's suggesting the same thing, a Ralphie magnifier. And Ronald is saying, can be the other way around. I wear glasses too, but have to take them off when reading. Aye, absolutely, Ronald, you're absolutely right. Whiskey Weekend Dram Harrow is saying, time to go to bed. Thanks, Aqvavitae. There's somebody else a wee bit nervous. The quiz tonight, I can't honestly look at you straight in the face and say it's going to be easy. There are some easy ones. There are some gimmies in there, but it might be a wee bit tricky. Thomas Elmer is saying that's when you need a new prescription. And Pete Head is saying double no is the norm. Great approach. That's him saying don't add anything to the malt. Don't take anything away from the malt. Exactly as you've been doing since the foundations of Adelphi, Alex, way back at the start. Fantastic stuff. Thanks to everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope I've found the discussion with Alex tonight super fascinating. Alex, do you have time to hang out for another 10 or 15 minutes and play along a bit of a quiz? There will be some Ardnamurchan questions in there, so you have some gimmies.
I'd love to, Roy. Yeah, as long as I don't get called out on anything.
Everything is optional. You don't need to share your score. You're only playing against yourself. Everything is multiple choice. I'll ask Greg if he's good to come in. Give me a thumbs up, Greg, if you're able to join. Thank you, my friend. So good to see you. So good to see that you were able to stick with us. I'm going to try and pull up a wee screen share here. See if I can get this to work and bring in the quiz. Greg, are you able to join for a wee bit of 10 questions on multiple choice quiz?
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm out of my element, but yes. I'll give it a go.
I have to say that, and I was just confessing to this earlier that I've go back to earlier vPubs and the questions were much, much easier back then, but they've had to evolve with the knowledge base of the audience, right? So some of the questions will be a bit crunchy, but the multiple choice, it's 1 out of 3. You're only playing against yourself, and even the chimps have a chance of getting 33% score. So let's pull this in, see if this will work. 10 questions as usual, everybody. You don't need to share your scores with anyone. You're just playing for the fun of it. And hopefully some of these, even if you don't know them, they'll pique a bit of curiosity for you. Just before we roll into it, this is the guest schedule for the Waterlife film that kicks off tomorrow night. As Greg shared with us earlier, tomorrow night is Jim McEwen, Adam Hannett of Brookladdie, Charlie MacLean as well. Saturday is Mark Rainey, Blair Bowman, and you've got someone else joining on Saturday. Who was that?
Jack Milroy.
Jack Milroy is also joining us Saturday as well. Fantastic stuff. Sunday night is Liam Hughes and Shug McMurray of the Glasgow Distillery, along with Greg Swartz himself. He's participating in that Q&A panel on Sunday evening. That would be a good one to join. Monday night is Rachel Barley and Jenna Ellie. Now that's Jenna Whiskey Go Girl SMWS Jenna. Tuesday is Stephen Rankin from Gordon MacPhail and Josh Peters, the whiskey writer. And then on Wednesday night, we've got William Grant's David Stewart. You might find a wee nod to him in the quiz tonight, as well as Charlie MacLean. So that would be, you just go along to wateroflifefilm.com and you can have a wee look at the schedule and how to get yourself an all-access ticket. Good luck, everybody, as we roll into the quiz. 10 questions. I'll get through this as quick as I can because I realise it's already midnight. Thanks to everybody for staying so late tonight. Question 1, Scotland's highest distillery by elevation is what? Note the banana skin here. There may be a bit of a banana skin. The highest distillery in Scotland by elevation is either A, Dilwynny, B, Brayval, or C, Tomintoul. Brayval or Braes of Glenlivet? A, Dilwynny, B, Brayval, C, Tomintoul. I don't know if I've got any moderators in that are still able to manage the chat for this, but I'll do my best from here. Steve Atkiss is a Jim McEwen fan. He's going to be tuning in then tomorrow night, I guess, Steve. Whiskey Jason is in. He's helping to run the quiz for me. Jason, thank you so much, Jason, my friend over in Germany. Oh, this is splitting the crowd. I have to say I kind of expected that. Do either of you guys want to stab a guess? Alex, do you think you know this one? Or
you go for it, Greg.
Okay, I can give this. I think there's a trick question. Dalwhinnie is the highest by elevation with a visitor center, but Brayval is higher but has no public face.
Ooh.
So there you go. Greg, who says he's out of his element, kicks it out of the park on the very first. There are ways that Dalwhinnie can step up to its claim that it's the highest distillery using various methods, as Greg has just outlined. But generally speaking, by a difference of 9 feet, 1.5 people tall, Brayval takes it. If you go by Ordnance Survey or whatever, Brayval sneaks it. Tomintoul is often suggested to be the highest, but that's the highest village in the Highlands. Well done, Greg. You're absolutely right. Brayval is. Do you know what? If anybody answers A for Dalwhinnie, based on their marketing alone, I don't think it's modern marketing in the past. Give yourself a half a point if you chose Dalwhinnie. Question 2. What do Inverleven, Pittyveich and Ladyburn all have in common? I know that you're thinking they're closed. Look at the smile. No, this is the vPub. It's a wee bit harder than that. A, they're all closed Diageo distilleries. B, they're built on the same site as other distilleries. Or C, they were all closed lowland distilleries. So either A, they're all closed Diageo distilleries. B, they were built on the same site as other distilleries. Or C, they're all closed lowland distilleries. I can see Alex is pondering. Greg looks confident again.
That's false confidence.
That's swagger, is it?
That's whiskey confidence.
I'm trying process of elimination on this one.
Jerry Miller is quite rightly claiming a half a point for he obviously answered Dalwhinnie. Well done. And this is kind of splitting the audience as well. Although a lot of them they're kind of split between B and C. Either of you guys can stab a guess or share your wisdom.
I'm only thinking B because it's process of elimination. A, technically Diageo didn't exist, although it depends on how you've worded that question. Worded that answer.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay with B.
I say B too.
Absolutely correct. Process of elimination is a good strategy in the quiz at the end, absolutely. Even though Diageo didn't exist, we're speaking about that, it would have been in the previous ownership of the company that we've come to know as Diageo. Inverleven would have been up in the Dumbarton Grain Complex. Petit Veich would have been bolted onto the side of Duffton, and Ladyburn would have been, well, Ladyburn is now, I guess, Ailsa Bay down in Grant's complex down in Girvan, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's right. I'm pretty sure that's right. But yes, they were all built on the same site as, I've written grain distilleries. That's a mistake there. They were all built on the same site as other distilleries. That's a bit of a blunder on my side. I checked this quiz as well.
I think the question had it written as other distilleries, but the answer, did it change? Doesn't matter.
There, you did. I did. It's other distilleries. I'm covered. Greg, I'm glad you're here. That means I'm covered. I'm covered. I changed it on one slide and not the other. But it's other distilleries, because Petit Veich is obviously on the site of Duffton, which is Malt. Question 3, and this is a quote. Very good. Might and ah over buying a full bottle if the price is high. But you can buy a glass with confidence, and if it's under £50, take a punt. That represents what on maltreviews.com, on their scoring system. What does that represent on Malt Reviews? A, 4 out of 10, B, 7 out of 10, or C, 9 out of 10? Malt Review, we all know maltreview.com, fully independent review whiskey website. Big team of contributors now. In fact, I think it's the biggest, most visited of its kind now. But they're suggesting that if the whiskey's very good, might and ah over buying a full bottle if the price is high. But you can buy a glass with confidence, and if it's under £50, take a punt. What score does that represent? What do you think, Alex?
Judging by their very good, but how do we put this nicely? Very strong reviews.
Brutally critical reviews.
Yeah, I would be going for A, 4 out of 10.
Greg, what do you think?
B. I'd say B, but I'm guessing.
That is how they justify a score of 7 out of 10. I have to say, given the amount of whiskies that they review and share on that site now, there's daily content going out from maltreview.com. When they score something 7 out of 10, you start to pay a bit of attention. If it's affordable and they're scoring an 8 out of 10, you buy it. And it's very rare to see. I don't think I've seen a 10. I can't recall many 9s either. But yes, they're brutally critical, but they do justify their scoring, and you can go and see exactly what their scoring stands for, what it means, and what it's all about. 7 out of 10, and that's how they define it. Question 4, which of these distilleries has a name change in this year's, that's a 2021 Malt Whisky Yearbook, that's this pink edition here. Which of these distilleries has a name change in this book? A, Breval, B, Arran, C, Anok. Maybe there should be a banana skin here. Maybe there should be a wee banana skin emoji, I don't know. But there's a name change. I'm currently, I've got my nose in a Deanston. And I love Deanston. I love Deanston malt. I love the maltiness of it. I love the fruit in Deanston. I love the texture of Deanston, and I love the spice in Deanston. But if you bought this Deanston, you would have to buy this because you love the cask that it's come from. There's very little of the Deanston DNA left. It's still a very good whiskey, but it's very cask driven. And this is their Union exclusive. It's a 15-year-old 2004 PX finish. Pedro Jimenez is very syrupy sweet to my palate. And while I do occasionally suffer from a sweet tooth, I prefer... Oh, that's actually really quite nice tonight. There's quite a lot of spice there tonight. I didn't expect that. What do you think, Greg? Do you know this one?
I think it's B.
You think Aaron through a name change? I can tell you that our knowledgeable crowd in the lounge, almost exclusively with Jimmy Legg screaming it from the rooftops that it's B, absolutely agree that Aaron did go through a name change for this year's Malt Whisky Yearbook, because of course now there's 2 on the island. There's Lochranza in the north and Lag in the south. Question 5, the halfway point, is always a picture question. I'm kind of giving it away tonight. This is a fairly easy one, I think. Maybe both of you guys will be able to know what distillery we're looking at, but I'll give you three options regardless. Are we looking at A, Glenturret, B, Glenrothes, or C, Tamdhu? 4 out of 4 for GG, well done. Snapper XV, that looks like a new name, scoring 4 out of 4. Fantastic score. Nice to welcome you in. Good to have you here. Blair Stevenson on 4 out of 4, as well as Rob Gilmore. Rob, I think that's a new name as well. Nice to welcome you. 4 out of 4 is another great score. Too Slow Rob is on 4 out of 4. Any other 4s that I'm missing? Good stuff. Mark on 4 out of 4 as well. Well done, Mark. Guys, would you care to take a guess at this?
I've only ever been there in a blizzard, so I'm kind of slightly...
Where have you been in a blizzard, Alex?
If it's the one I'm thinking of, it used to have a famous grouse. In fact, you can see it. Can you see it? On top of the weather vane.
Wonderful eyes, absolutely. It does indeed. Famous grouse, and of course, we're talking about Glenturret. It used to be under the ownership of Edrington. Edrington still have a hand in there, of course, but now it's under the ownership of Lalique. Sorry, Greg, what did you say?
I did not say.
Yeah. Spotting the famous grouse comes from years of looking at Adelphi labels.
Looking at pagodas as well. Excellent stuff. Where is Towser the cat? Roland is saying Whiskey Radar. But yes, if you answered A for Glenturret, as most of you did, I can see, you're absolutely right. Give yourself a point. Question 6, David Stewart of William Grants and Sons started with the company in which year? Look at the wording of the question. Started with the company. Did he start in A, 1962, B, 1968, or C, 1974? Where did David Stewart MBE? When did David Stewart MBE start at Grants? He's obviously taken a much less active role there now. He's got people in place. Brian Kinsman is in place, as well as Kelsey McKechnie. Now, you were up there, Greg, for the movie, weren't you? Of course, you were with David Stewart.
We spent an entire day with David Stewart and Kelsey McKechnie together.
Excellent. That must have been great fun.
It was great fun. It was a lot of fun. It was Halloween too.
I get the impression that David Stewart is a very gentle, humble man as well. He comes across that way.
Very much so. Very much so.
What year do you think he started working for William Grants?
How
long were you there? A day?
A day, but no, I know it. Believe it or not, I believe it's. I'm confusing it with. There's two different dates I have in mind, and I'm confusing which one's which. So I'm trying to.
Have you got a guess for us, Alex?
Purely on time served, which would be the middle one, but I don't know if he started straight out.
I can tell you, and I understand why Greg is backwards and forwards there. He's been the malt master for William Grant since 1974, but he started working there in 1962. Quite incredible career. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Coming up on 60 years.
He was a clerk, right? When he got hired?
Yeah, I think he did.
Clerk or something.
He did a bit of everything from 62 all the way through, working himself up to becoming the maltmaster in 74, position that he's held ever since. Absolutely fascinating career. Must be a fascinating guy to speak to, Greg. I'm a wee bit jealous. Question 7. Which of these is a Glasgow restaurant with an extensive whiskey selection? Is it A, the Pot Still, B, Torravec, or C, Ardnamurchan? Which of these is a Glasgow restaurant with an extensive whiskey selection? So you can have, in this restaurant, you can have some food, some tasty food, and you can peruse the whiskey and enjoy some, instead of dessert, you can put away a dram or two and consume your calories that way. And Jimmy Legg is saying he's unhappy with me on 5 out of 6. Jimmy Legg, behave yourself. 5 out of 6. Maybe you were hoping for a 10 tonight. You were hoping to use the 10 out of 10 emoji. Drams and Draws is using his half point for the winner. He's got 5.5 out of 6. Fantastic stuff. Too Slow Rob is on 5 out of 6. Colin Mayers is in, typing it out. Colin, it looks like a new name. It's good to welcome you here. Do either of you guys... Well, Alex, I'm not even going to ask you. Greg, that kind of gives it away.
It's A.
You've fallen for the banana skin.
Oh.
Ardnamurchan. So the reason, this is the funniest thing on the planet, is that TripAdvisor had this thing going for years where the pot still came up as Glasgow's best restaurant. Because people were spamming TripAdvisor because of the hot pies that you could buy from their bar grill. And I don't mean for a sec, I have had many a fabulous tasty pie in the pot still. But to suggest that the pot still is even a restaurant, let alone Glasgow's best restaurant, is hilarious. I just think it's one of those really funny things that you'll be very familiar, Greg, about Glasgow, that kind of Glasgow humour. Ardnamurchan, just a couple hundred yards north in Hope Street, obviously must be going through another brutal time of closure right now. Ardnamurchan restaurant is in Hope Street as well, and they do great food and have a lot of whiskies. And there is a tie-in, isn't there, with Ardnamurchan?
Yeah, I mean, it's part owned by the daughter of the guy who looks after all our electricals, electrician up in Ardnamurchan, Gus, and most of the produce, most of the meat is coming from Ardnamurchan. So you can, I mean, we've been there many times, but you can sit there eating a steak or something, or venison actually in particular, knowing that it's more than likely that the distillery has fed that with draft.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. Yep.
It's that direct.
There may be a couple of people in tonight actually, or we might catch us on the replay, that I've enjoyed a meal up at Ardnamurchan. My friend over in the States, Dwayne Large, Werner, or Warner, I guess in his accent. Quite a few people have enjoyed a meal up at Ardnamurchan. And then once you've finished and had a couple of drams there, you can stagger down to the pot still for Glasgow's, according to TripAdvisor, best restaurant. It's been since rectified, but it was a funny story that was there for a wee while. Question 8 is the crow flies. Ardnamurchan's closest neighbouring distillery is, as the crow flies, A, Tobermory, B, Torrovec, or C, MacLean. As the crow flies. I can see Alex stepping back to you for a wee second there. Just as a heartbeat of doubt, perhaps. And Hoyt is saying, is that the one we went to? Hoyt, absolutely. It was the one that we went to with Warner and Warner Jr. You were there as well, my friend. We ate in Ardnamurchan together, Hoyt. Fantastic to have you in, my friend, and fantastic to have got that comment. Superb. Actually, is saying, I want to go to a restaurant, any restaurant. Actually, you and I both, I want to be in a pub. I want to shake someone's hands. I want to give them a hug. I want to see them over the top of a glass. I want to be a missing people. We've just got to be patient for a wee bit longer, unfortunately, my friend. I hear your sentiment. I actually absolutely do. I'm going to just come straight in, Alex, and ask, as a crow flies, are you going to agree with me here? Which is the nearest distillery? Because it's pretty close.
It depends what you're going to say.
What would your answer be?
Mine would be C.
Oh, that's lucky. That's fortunate. But I tell you what, as the crow flies, there's a half a mile in it.
Yeah, there's not much. And the crow can get buffeted by the wind up there quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's 5 miles as the crow flies, 5.5 miles, let's say. But if you were to drive there, it would take you between 1 hour, 20 minutes and 2 hours, according to Google Maps, depending on whether you took the road route or the boat road. So that just shows you, they're very, very close, but such is the terrain on the West Coast that there's a huge detour to get to visit the two. So if you're planning on visiting the two in the same day, you better have military precision itinerary scheduled. It's not going to be easy. Don't look on a map and think, unless you have a helicopter, perhaps. Question 9, second from last, as well as refill ex-bourbon casks. The inaugural release from Ardnamurchan includes some A, Spanish Oak Oloroso, B, Spanish Oak Pedro Jimenez, C, both of the above? Yep, Alex is taking a relaxed sip of his dram. He's comfortable with this one. Second from last, how's the scoring going in the lounge? Jerry Miller is saying, I'll say I'm enjoying this. 3.5 out of 8. Jerry, I thought you were scoring better than that. Have you dropped off a wee bit? Chris the Whiskey Bowman is on 5. He's already on a pass mark, as well as Roland Whiskey Radar. Trent Smith is on 5.5 out of 8, claiming he's half a point, as well as Jason Nuss. That looks like a new name. Jason, no, maybe not. I think I have maybe welcomed you before. If I haven't, I'm welcoming you tonight, my friend. Actually, is absolutely claiming that. He's saying 9.5 out of 8. Actually, I don't know how they count over in France, but I like the way you do it here. Everyone, Greg, I'll ask you to guess the last Ardnamurchan question. What would you suggest?
I have to admit, I haven't had it, so it's a guess, but I think B.
It's both. And thanks to the wee QR code that you can scan, you can see exactly how much of each is in the vatting. Quite fascinating. Okay, let's see how the scores are doing. You guys don't need to share your score, but I have the feeling that you're scoring okay. Oh no, Alex is like, nope. Parachute, okay. Chuck Malt Minion is on 5 on a pass mark already. Graham Fraser is going with the crowd, always a safe bet. That's why you've got to watch out for the banana skins, though, because sometimes the crowd can lead each other down a slippy alleyway. Peter Box on 6. Richie Z, good to see you, Richie. Good to see you, Peter. Both on 6 out of 9. Chris Whiskey Bowman on 6. Rob Gilmore 7. Looking for the high scores now. Any big high scores coming in? 8 out of 9 for Mark Slinger. Mark, that's an excellent score. Well done. That's the highest I've seen so far, an 8 out of 9. Going into the final question. Chininic is a huge capacity Scotch distillery. This is just for Jimmy Legg. This is just for you, Jimmy, since you hate me so much on the questions. Always put an asshat question in at the end. Chininic is a huge capacity Scotch distillery. In fact, it is what? A, Diageo's largest. B, Diageo's second largest. Or C, Diageo's third largest. The capacity questions are automatically asshat questions, okay? But it's interesting to me, very interesting. And I would be careful. Go ahead.
Are we just talking malt or grain as well?
Alex Bruce is your friend, whiskey folk in the lounge. He's he's shining a torch for you there. It's an asshat question, so he's giving you a bit of a hand there. I have not defined malt. In fact, I've chosen to use the word Scotch.
Sorry.
So there you go. Too slow. Rob, Andrew Piers using the asshat emoji. They're all complaining. And Rob is suggesting that it is a bit of a banana skin as well. Whiskey Bowman thinks it's B. Gary Carew thinks it's C. Actually thinks it's B. And Helen thinks it's she's speaking to Gregor. I didn't catch Helen's answer. Richard Hall is in. He's thinking it's A. Whiskey Radar thinks it's A. Stu Baby thinks it's A. And Matthias Metzner thinks it's A. This is an asshat question and a banana skin question, so I'm making no friends tonight. And Jimmy Legg is agreeing with me that all capacity questions are asshat questions by definition, which is absolutely fine. I'll tell you, as Alex probably pointed out, do you care to expand on why you asked that question?
It was actually a question that I hadn't really thought about the consequences of. But I'm assuming that something like Cameron Brigg is going to be larger than most of their malt distilleries. We've also got Rose Isle, which must be up there.
Yes.
So I'm punting for
Third largest distillery, the biggest distillery in Diageo's portfolio, and I know that they own part of North British. I understand that, but we're not talking. It's Diageo-owned distilleries. It's the third largest after Cameron Bridge, by far the biggest. I think 150 or 140 million litres or something crazy like that. Quite huge scale. And Rose Isle about 12 to 12.5 million litres. But Chininic comes in at third, just over 10 million litres. Still a huge facility and wonderful liquid that comes from Chininic. We've touched on it briefly, Alex. We both quite enjoy the liquid that comes from there from time to time, right?
Yeah, it's delicious.
Wonderful stuff. So Diageo's third largest. let's go in and see how the scoring is. I know that you guys maybe don't want to share your scores, which is absolutely fine, but I hope at least you had a wee bit of fun with that. Roseisle, Ord and Tanninic. Ord is just a wee bit behind Tanninic. It is a huge facility as well. Let's see if I'm looking for any high scores. Okay, Malt Minion Chuck on 6. Gino is on 7. 7 for Jimmy Legg. Any high scores? Rob Gilmore's, that was a great score on 8. Actually is saying naughty. Yes, I know. Sorry, actually. Steve Atkins is saying 8 out of 10. He'll take that. It's a brilliant score, Steve. Well done. Anybody else? Chris Pollack on 8. McCallum finding Ray the Dock on a full house. 10 out of 10. My friend over in Frankfurt in Germany, Doc. Well done on a full house tonight. 10 out of 10 is brilliant. Sid Martin on 9. An excellent score. Scrolling down quickly just to see if I've missed anyone. Jason Nuss is saying 5 out of 5. It's a pass mark, Jason. It's a good, solid pass mark. Eric is saying boo on a 6. Another solid pass mark. And Whiskey Central is saying lovely night. Thank you, Roy. Anybody who wants to say thanks to Greg for staying so late with us to hang out and have a bit of fun for the quiz. And I'm sure you'll want to say thanks to Greg after you connect with the movie. It's looking very, very promising indeed. And thanks to Alex Bruce for his patience and for his amazing insight tonight as well. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies for hanging out with us right to the end. Stayed above 200 even after the brutal quiz tonight. Wonderful to have you all. Excellent stuff. And I have frozen. My chat's frozen. That's not an excuse to stop reading. Yeah, my chat is frozen. I got as far. I'm currently looking at half of Whiskey Central's quote. Hopefully that'll rectify itself in a wee minute. My connection's fine. You can hear me, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I thought I'd frozen there. Okay, wonderful stuff. Fantastic to have you all participating tonight. Alex, thank you so much for coming along. I wish you very, very best with what you're doing. But everything seems to be going remarkably well, almost like the whiskey is indeed taking care of itself. And Greg,
thank you.
You're welcome. And Greg, thank you so much for coming on. And I wish you very, very... it might turn out that this is the best way that you could have launched that film. It might just be serendipity has played a wee hand, and it might go even better than you were if you were doing it in, let's say, in real life. But I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you
both for joining me. If you stay behind the scenes, I'll get a chance to raise a wee glass with you before you slink off. Thank you very, very much. Greg Swartz, thank you very much, my friend. Good night. Raise a wee glass.
Sure.
And Alex Bruce. Slanjavati both, thank you.
Thanks.
And you can stay in the background and I'll check in with you in a minute. Yeah, my chat is definitely frozen. It's the first time that's ever happened. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to refresh the screen. I hope that everybody can still see me. Hope that it's still working okay. The monitor says that the stream is healthy, but there is something broken about the chat. I'm glad it happened right at the end. Listen, I'm very, very grateful to everybody for joining in week after week and hanging out with me. This is a wonderful outlet for me. I hope you're having some fun with it as well. I'll be back here a week from now. My patrons will get to hang out with me on Sunday night. But for everybody else, it's a week from tonight. There's no guest. It'll just be me, but there will be a light backbone theme to keep the whiskey discussion and chat flowing. And until then, I'll raise this very, very grateful glass of whiskey, of Ardnamurchan. Actually, let's raise what's left of the Ardnamurchan and say thank you all for hanging out with me on another Thursday night, and I look forward to welcoming you back here a week from now. Until then, beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies, you're all very dearly loved. Have a good weekend and Slanchava. Night night.